It flashed and went off, but it was red, and it said red. It's like. Thank you all for being here. We're going to get started in just a minute or two. And we'll get started also with interpretation in a minute or two. We know folks are parking and they had to go out of the lot and come back around. So we wanted to make sure we gave time for everybody to park, but we'll get started shortly.
Would you like the interpreters to interpret that into their respective languages?
Yes, if you can go ahead and interpret that, please.
Sí, buenas tardes a todos. Gracias por su paciencia. Vamos a comenzar en unos minutos, pero estamos dándole la oportunidad a las personas que van llegando que se acomoden. Sabemos de que está difícil, ¿verdad? A veces el tráfico. Y pues gracias por su paciencia. Thank you.
Magandang gabi po. Magsisimula na po tayo sa loob ng ilang minuto. Bigyan lang natin po ng pagkakataon ang mga dadalaw para makaparada. Alam po natin na may traffic pero nagdadatingin na po sila. Maghintay lang po tayo na isang sandali. Salamat po.
សួស្តីបងប្អូនខ្មែរយើងនឹងបន្តិចទៀតយើងនឹងបើកកិច្ចប្រជុំអង្គប្រជុំរបស់ពួកយើងអ្នកខ្លះគ្នាមានបញ្ហាចតឡានទិញទួចហើយដោយចរាចរណ៍ផងណាបងប្អូនសូមមេត្តាអត់ធ្មត់រងចាំបន្តិចទៀតយើងនឹងចាប់ផ្ដើមកិច្ចប្រជុំរបស់ពួកយើងសូមអរគុណ
Okay, I think that we can get started. It seems like the crowd of folks walking in have settled in. I'm going to turn the mic over to Diana Sarabia Briceño, who's going to give some language justice announcements for us to get started. We have multiple languages here. Sorry, my name is Lamika Castillo, by the way, and I'm going to be your facilitator. But I wanted to make sure that we had everybody can understand what we're saying in the language in which they communicate. And so Diana's going to give some language justice announcements, and then we'll get going. I'm turning over to Diana.
Hello, hola. My name is Diana, like she said. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I'm... Oh, all right, cool. I'm one of your co-facilitators this evening. I'm reading off my note so the interpreters can say what I'm saying. Before we dive into our presentations, we'll start with a quick language justice announcement to ensure everyone can fully understand one another. Thank you all for your patience as we take the step to create an inclusive and safe space for everyone. So let's begin. And if we can move to slide 2.
Y buenas tardes a todos. Yo soy Diana, ¿verdad? Ella es el pronombre. Queremos comenzar ya pronto, ¿verdad? Pero tenemos algunas instrucciones de cómo pueden escuchar esta presentación en su idioma. Vamos a pasar a la siguiente diapositiva.
Magandang gabi po. Ako po si Diana. Magsisimula na po tayo. Meron lang po tayong mga ilang instruksyon tungkol po sa katarungan ng hustisya at susunod na sisimula na po natin. Susunod na slide. Go ahead, Kamay, interpreter.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you sir អរុនសួស្តីសាយ័ន្តសួស្តីបងប្អូនទាំងអស់គ្នាខ្ញុំបាទឈ្មោះ Diana ខ្ញុំជាអ្នកសម្របសម្រួលក្នុងកិច្ចប្រជុំរបស់យើងនៅថ្ងៃនេះក៏ប៉ុន្តែមុននឹងយើងចាប់ផ្ដើមយើងនឹងមានសេចក្តីប្រកាសប្រើការឧបករណ៍បកប្រែជាភាសាគេហៅថាសេចក្តីប្រកាសអំពីយុទ្ធធម៌បកប្រែជាភាសាបន្តិចទៀតយើងនឹងចាប់ផ្ដើមដាក់ slide បន្តមកអរគុណបងប្អូន
All right, I think it's my turn now. So we're just going to go to slide 2 real quick. And this is for our Zoom folks, since this meeting is hybrid. We just want to talk about selecting your language. So if you can go to the interpretation bar at the bottom of your screen and then click on the globe. If someone can click the slide. If you click on the glove icon, it looks like a small world. From there, you'll select the language that you desire to hear. If you're a monolingual English speaker, I don't think that feature is available, but you should just be in the main room. And then you can either select Spanish, Tagalog, Khmer. And now we'll let the interpreters say that one more time, because you guys should be listening at this option.
Si esta es una reunión híbrida, entonces vamos a tener interpretación en varios idiomas. Seleccione el idioma que desea haciendo clic en el icono del mundo en la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, en sus pantallas.
Magandang
Gracias,
gabi
thank
po. Ito pong pagpupulong ay hybrid po, kaya meron pong mga taong dadalo sa pamamagitan ng Zoom. Kung kayo po ay nasa Zoom at nais niyo pong marinig itong pagpupulong sa Tagalog, pumili ng iyong nais na wika sa pamamagitan ng pag-click sa icon ng mundo sa ibaba ng iyong Zoom screen. Salamat po. Kamay, please.
Thank you Royce thank you sir បងប្អូនអង្គប្រជុំរបស់យើងនេះគេហៅ hybrid គេហៅថាកូនកាត់ណាតាមកម្រិតគ្នាតាមហើយនឹងតមានវត្តមានផ្ទាល់អញ្ចឹងបងប្អូនសូមមេត្តាជ្រើសរើសភាសាដែលបងប្អូនចង់បានដោយការចុចនៅលើរូបតំណាងពិភពលោកតូចនៅលើខាងក្រោមនៅអេក្រង់ Zoom របស់អស់លោកអរគុណ
And we could go slide 3. So from there, for those that are iPad or phone users, it's best if you are in the Zoom app. This is just so you can access the more option icon, and the globe icon would appear as well. And from there, you just choose again your desired language. And wait, the interpreters will say that now. So just we're waiting for everyone.
Para los que están en un iPad o un celular, vayan donde dice interpretación de idiomas y seleccionen haciendo clic en el icono del mundo en la parte inferior de su pantalla.
Para po sa mga nasa iPad o telepono, baguhin ang setting ng Zoom sa ninanais na wika. Pimili ng nais na wika sa pag-click ng icon ng mundo sa inyong Zoom screen. Doon po makikita nyo ang wikang Tagalog. Okay? Kamay, please. Rotan.
Thank you Royce thank you sir បងប្អូនចង់ស្ដាប់ភាសាតាម iPad ឬតាម computer គឺ smartphone អីណាសូមបងប្អូនជ្រើសរើសភាសាដែលបងប្អូនចង់បានទៅហើយចុចនៅលើរូបតំណាងពិភពលោកនៅដូចខាងក្រោមតាម Zoom របស់បងប្អូនអញ្ចឹងណាហើយនៅក្នុងកូនផែនទីតូចហ្នឹងចុចទៅហើយជ្រើសរើសភាសាដែលយើងចង់បានទៅភាសាខ្មែរអញ្ចឹងណាហើយបិទសំឡេង Zen អញ្ចឹងណាបងប្អូនអរគុណ
All right, so that should be the last slide that they should be interpreting out loud. From here, everybody should be on the channel. And then another great feature now that we have this afternoon is that we do have slides also available in all languages. So for those that are in Zoom, you have the ability to switch from the top, click on the Zoom option, click more options, and then select the slides that you want. For those that are in person, you have the ability in front of you with your little papers that will show you the language desired. For those that are in person, in the back, there is some headsets. If you need those, please go to the back and access those. And then feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions or need any assistance with that. And then throughout the process, if you have any questions, there is a Q&A section at the end. You feel free to use your hand. For those that are in Zoom, you can make a comment on the chat or also raise your hand and someone will answer at the end of the Q&A section. A couple of reminders for everybody is just to slow down. Right now I'm talking a little fast just so that we can get moving. But, remember to speak slowly, right? Facilitators, presenters, anyone who's asking a question, just to speak at a moderate pace, take a breath after each sentence and pause, and then every time there's a switching questions or answer, you can say your name, because the people that are listening can only hear the interpreter, so they don't know who else is talking. So this is just so they know who's talking at the time. Another thing would be to speak up or use the microphone if you're in person, right? Making sure if you're in Zoom to use your headphones with a microphone just so they have better quality. The next thing would be, again, say your name each time you speak. And this is just so that all of us know who you're talking to. And then another thing would be to one person at a time. That's another thing. Interpreters can only translate one person. They can't translate everybody else talking at the same time. The last thing is just to remind everybody that language is not a barrier, right? This is just to remind everybody that multiple languages in a space like this helps us gain multiple worldviews, perspectives, and strategies, and it creates an opportunity to expand in our understanding, imagination, vision, and what is possible. From here, I'm going to pass it over to Lamika.
Thank you so much, Diana. Can we give her a round of applause, please? Why? Because that is a lot to cover, right? And also give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you so much for being here this evening. And also thank you for your flexibility as we are in Long Beach, which is one of the most diverse cities in the country, right? That's probably why one of the reasons maybe some of you live here. And there are multiple languages that are spoken in this community. And I want to thank CARB and the South Coast Air Quality Management District and the other community and public partners here for making an effort to ensure that everybody can participate. And we did have requests from folks to be able to have this meeting in multiple languages. And I can tell you right now, I facilitate a lot of public meetings, and you don't, even in city council meetings, you don't get this level of effort to make sure that everybody is able to participate. So I do want to acknowledge that for the folks who helped to make that happen. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Lamika Castillo. Use she, her, ella pronouns. And I'm the co-founder and principal of Castillo Consulting Partners. We are an organization that is partnering with the California Air Resources Board, who is hosting this meeting. We also partner with the South Coast Air Quality Management District, which is the air quality management district that oversees the Long Beach area. And we work on a lot of different projects, and we were asked to come and facilitate this particular meeting that is about the methyl bromide that has been, what is the word I'm looking for? Discovered, that folks in the community said, hey, we would like you all to investigate and see what's going on here. We think that there's methyl bromide, right? In addition to being a facilitator, I think it's important for you all to know that I'm not just some random person who came in to this work in this area with you all. I actually have a deep connection to the city of Long Beach, and specifically West Long Beach. Although I don't live in Long Beach, I attended church here in Long Beach for 15 years. I was on the board of the Fountain of Life Church, which is located here in West Long Beach. It started in North Long Beach, came over to West Long Beach, and I used to take the Blue Line train every Sunday and Thursday for Bible study in church, right on over here, getting off on Wardlow or Willow, catching the bus or another, ride from a friend to make it over to church. I also volunteered with the Family Center, which is located in West Long Beach at 32nd and Santa Fe, right across from Silverado Park. How many people familiar with Silverado Park? Right, so y'all know what I'm talking about, that little green and white house. I spent many, many years in that little green and white house tutoring elementary school kids here in West Long Beach. I also have a sister who lives here in West Long Beach, and she's taking care of my kids so that I could be here tonight for that meeting, so shout out to her too. But why do I share all of that with you? Because I think it's important for you to know that the agencies who are hosting this meeting took the concerns of the community seriously when you all reached out and said that you wanted them to take a look into what was going on. And also that, you have folks here who are familiar with this community and really committed to partnering with community members to address any concerns that you may have. I want to also say that for today's meeting, you're going to be hearing from several subject matter experts, right? Folks who do this for a living. They're out there evaluating what's happening with the air quality in the community. They are folks who are working in agriculture, in air quality management, and just supporting the community. I'm not as expert as they are, right? I don't consider myself an expert at all in this area. But they are going to be sharing a lot of information, a lot of data that has been collected over the past couple years in response to the request to take a look at what was going on in the area. And as we kind of explore this together, I want to acknowledge a few things. One, emotions can run high, right? As we're getting information about the quality of air in our community and the things that are happening that we as residents may not be aware of, right? I'm somebody who grew up with childhood asthma. I had severe childhood asthma for many, many years and my family was told that the reason why I had asthma was because of personal things, right? Like maybe somebody smoked. That was not the case. It was definitely environmental. And so I understand what it feels like to have questions about what is happening in the air around us and not have the answers to that as an individual, but really seeking and looking to the folks who are experts to provide that information. And that's what these folks are here for today, right? They responded to the request and they're providing information and want to have a conversation about what does it look like for us to partner together to address the concerns. There is going to be several presentations, and following the presentations, the bulk of the time we want to spend actually in question and answer, right? What are the questions that you have? What kind of answers can be provided? We may not have all the answers and solutions tonight, but it is important that they get laid out on the table, right? And so we thank you so much for being here and for using your voice to, well, first to have your listening ears. What is going on? Let me find out, how I can get information for myself and bring it back to my community. And then also, in what ways can I advocate for my community given the information that's being provided to us, right? So with that, I am going to pass this over to one of your fellow community members, Thero Golden, who is with the Wilmington Community Steering Committee and also a member of the West Long Beach Neighborhood Association and the Moving Forward Network. And so he's going to share a few words. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you for coming out. And I would like to start off with acknowledging the person who got us to this point. And that's Mr. Jesse Marquez. He's extremely ill and he needs all of us to pray for him. And we would like to everyone to remember him in your prayers this evening. He has been a long time worker in the community, definitely on all environmental issues. He's well known throughout this state and some parts of the United States. He has dedicated his life to this work. And everyone, I want to make sure you know he's the one who started this effort to get us to this point. And I want to thank you again. And that's one of his good friends right there. But as we start here, I want to acknowledge that methyl bromide in close proximity to a school should have never happened, in my opinion. It was something that had been talked about. There was no way to substantiate the facts that it was there until CAR put some monitors, at least a monitor. And readings came back extremely disappointing. And that disappointment in the ranges that they showed us is anywhere from, I'm going to say above 0.1, which is the limit for exposure, up to 600 BPMs. I mean, ppbs, excuse me, parts per billion. This may affect those children for the rest of their lives. Also found out that the company who has been using the pesticide, I do not know how long they have been using the pesticide, but they have been at that site for over 27 years. We have a crisis. The use of that pesticide in that location, if it continues, must be eliminated. It cannot enter into the atmosphere again, like one of the proposals says. It is hurting our children. Hudson is now closed. It's at least 623 homes in close proximity to that site. People live, people cannot be under bondage. That cannot be sustainable. Those things that are sustainable is what we should be trying to achieve for everyone. In California, in some areas, we're extremely blessed. They have a political structure that favors equality and environmental justice. That's what this is, an environmental catastrophe that's been going on for decades, perhaps. And if it wasn't for Jesse, we may not know it today. So when you listen to the rest of the presentation, be mindful that it is my recommendation to every organization I belong to on environment issues, each one of the politicians' office that's being represented here, it must be eliminated, not transferred to somewhere else. The technology is out there to do that. It may be costly, but our lives are more valuable. And sometimes you must demand that excellence. And this is one of those times. Nothing less will satisfy this particular issue. We have an opportunity to do something to the impacts of pollution in West Long Beach, who is a disproportionately affected community by pollution. Why should we accept anything less than that? We should not. We have a lot of issues Mr. McMillan is aware of. It's not his fault. And nothing I'm saying here is to blame anyone here. Okay, this is what we have to deal with today, and we have to have a better tomorrow. It's about constant improvement. I believe the largest room in the world is the room for improvement. I believe we should be moving forward all the time, doing better every day. That's what makes things work. We have to recognize our mistakes and move on from them. We can't live in them. The people who are affected, we don't even know them. We don't even know how many there is. It's a lot of work has to go into this to make it equitable. We're not asking for nothing else but equitable. Those things that give us a certain range of freedom. That's what America is about. Most people are here today because of that. Don't care when you got here or how you got here. It's about freedom, exercising who you are as an individual. That's why we are here. We should not be fussing about how somebody got here. Let's do something together here. Those things that make us strong is who we are, not how someone judges us. That belongs to a higher power. I tell people a lot of times, I do not do God's work. I don't judge people. I accept everyone as an individual and who they are. I believe that's what makes this world a whole lot better. But back to the subject at hand, there's a lot of ideas, and the one I mentioned about the way that was proposed earlier this week, that it's flawed. I'll be more than happy to discuss it at any time with anyone. And it's seriously flawed. It is, in my opinion, 1850 technology. It didn't work back then, and it can't work today. It's studies that show cruise ships sailing in the middle of the ocean are the dirtiest place in the world at that time. There's more pollution on them than 14 of the major cities in the country. The pollution goes up at the exhaust pipe and right back down on the ship. These are facts. These are facts. That's why in this case, elimination is the only positive outcome. Not only for this community, transferring it to another community is just as bad. Let's eliminate it and move forward. And that's what we should be working toward. Is my time up? Okay. All right. I just want to thank everybody once again about why we are here. And please don't forget Jesse in your prayers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Golden. I didn't want to come take the mic because I felt like a sermon was coming. Yeah, I know you were getting ready. I could feel it. But I appreciate what you had to share on behalf of the community. And we are definitely thinking about Jesse and keeping him in thoughts and prayers. And I think one of the things that you mentioned about the health of the children, right? I know that for me, that's probably the most important thing is the health of the community and the health of the children. And folks are here today because they want to understand what is the impact of, what does this mean for our health, right? What does this mean for our children? What does this mean for our community, this methyl bromide? And Mr. Golden mentioned a lot of other things, ships, and this is Long Beach, right? The ports are here. The trucks come through. You got the 710 corridor, right? I mean, again, I don't live here. I know a whole lot about this area through research and through family members living here. And so there are lots of things impacting the air quality and the health in this community. Today's conversation is going to be focused on methyl bromide, right? And if you have other questions, I don't want to discourage it, but just know that the conversation today is focused on methyl bromide. And then we can talk about the other things, or at least get you connected to the folks who can answer questions about all of the other issues in the community as well. Okay? With that, I'm going to kick it over to Kevin Ope from the California Air Resources Board, who is going to introduce our panel and get the presentations going. Thank you.
Thank you, Lamika. All right, so before we get started, I just wanted to make sure to thank everybody in the audience for taking time out of your busy lives to join us. And I also wanted to thank those of you joining us over Zoom. I also wanted to make sure to extend a thank you to the staff from Salvation Army. They've been incredible. During the time of the wildfire, a lot of the leadership here has been deployed to help support the recovery efforts across the Los Angeles area. They could have said no, find another venue, but they've been very gracious and allowed us to continue to use this space. So thank you so much for Janice and her whole team for helping us to set up today. My name is Kevin Alp, and I work for the California Air Resources Board. I work as a part of the Office of Community Air Protection. And the Office of Community Air Protection, we work and partner with communities to identify local sources of pollution and develop strategies to address that pollution. One of the communities that we partner with, along with South Coast Air Quality Management District, is in Wilmington, Carson, and West Long Beach. And that's a group of communities that we've worked with for about 5 years to identify and address local sources of pollution. It's worth drawing a lesson from the experiences in that program. And one of the things I've learned from being a part of these meetings is get to the point. So I'm going to cut my remarks short and talk about why we're meeting today. Today, I want to talk a little bit about the purpose of the meeting, which you can see on the slide behind us, which first we want to talk a little bit about why we decided to monitor for methyl bromide. As Mr. Golden mentioned, local activist Jesse Marquez, who has been advocating to address lots of different sources of pollution in the area, and pointed out that this was an issue of concern. As a result of that, we deployed monitoring technology and identified elevated levels of methyl bromide in the community. We're going to talk a little bit about what that means for a health risk standpoint. And then we're going to talk about the work that our interagency team has been doing to address those emissions. Next slide. So before we get into the presentation, I want to start by summarizing the key points of the presentation. As I mentioned, Mr. Marquez identified the sources of fumigation that are happening in the community that have led to elevated levels of air pollution of methyl bromide. That concern has led to CARB monitoring for methyl bromide in 2023 and 2024. The monitoring effort did detect elevated levels of concentrations that exceeded health protective thresholds for long-term exposure in an area that we estimate is a few city blocks. It's important to stress that right now there is not an imminent health threat to the community. However, low levels breathed in certain parts over long periods of time can lead to health effects. Tonight, you're going to hear from staff from 5 agencies who have been working actively as a team to work proactively with the 2 facilities that have voluntarily agreed to additional measures to help reduce risk from exposure to the community. We also want to share with you how we will track and monitor these improvements and how we will be transparent by releasing a real-time data dashboard so you can see the levels of methyl bromide in your air. And I'm getting a message to remember to slow down. And so we as panelists will do our best. So we have a presentation that will take about 25 minutes. A lot of questions will come up, I'm sure, but a lot of those will be answered in later slides. So we're going to try to get through these slides as quickly as possible and then save the rest of the evening for questions tonight. So before we get into the presentation itself, I want to make sure to introduce our speakers. Again, my name is Kevin Ault. I'm with the Office of Community Air Protection. And next, I want to introduce Adolfo Garcia, who also is with the California Air Resources Board.
Thank you, Kevin. My name is Adolfo Garcia, as Kevin said, and I'm with the Community Air Monitoring Branch at the California Air Resources Board.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Maziar Candelus. I'm with DPR. I'm the manager of the air program. And DPR is a state agency that regulates pesticide to protect human health, environment, and also fosters sustainable pest management. Paul.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paula Torrado Plazas, and I'm the Racial Equity and Environmental Justice Program Manager at the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or OEHA for short. And OEHA is the lead state agency conducting assessments and evaluations of the health risks posed by different environmental contaminants and informing regulatory action.
Can you hear me now? All right, super. Hi, everybody. My name is Ian McMillan. I am with the South Coast Air Quality Management District. We are the regional air pollution agency for the greater Los Angeles metropolitan area, as well as the Inland Empire. We all wear many hats here. The hat that I'm wearing today is because we regulate toxics, we regulate facilities, we run the air toxic hotspots program. We'll talk more about that as we get through the slides. One quick note on the slides, I'm noticing that on the screen behind me, it's sometimes a little difficult to see. I want to make sure there is information that we're hoping to share. So if anybody doesn't have a presentation, I think these are all available in the back because I think we'll be pointing out some things later. So just wanted to put that note out. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maximiliano Regis. I go by Max, and I work for the County of Los Angeles Agricultural Commissioner, Weights and Measures, and we're your local ag department. Looking forward to sharing what we know. Thank you.
All right. And with that, we're going to jump right into the presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Adolfo Garcia, who's going to talk a little bit about the background and the air monitoring that has been done in West Long Beach.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, so before we get into the monitoring results, we wanted to share with you some basic information about methyl bromide. You'll probably see in this presentation. Can you hear me? Wow, I can hear me. Thank you. So again, in the presentation, you'll probably see us referring to methyl bromide in the written sense by the chemical name MeBr. So again, now to start off, it is a colorless and odorless gas. And it was internationally banned for most uses under the Montreal Protocol back in 1989 to protect the Earth's ozone layer. But it is still allowed in limited instances for spraying for pest and agricultural products that are imported and exported in California. A process that we've come to learn is called commodity fumigation. We regulate it in California as a toxic air contaminant, meaning we have established that it is an air pollutant that can increase risks of serious illness or pose a hazard to human health. Here in Los Angeles County, the County Agricultural Commissioner regulates methyl bromide as a restricted material, which we will explain more about in an upcoming slide. Next slide, please. So here I'll begin with why CARB is monitoring for methyl bromide in West Long Beach. During the early days of the Community Air Protection Program, CARB staff met with a number of the communities throughout the state, including the community of West Long Beach. During that tour of West Long Beach, the community shared concerns over the use of methyl bromide at the ports and near residential neighborhoods. In response to this, CARB staff evaluated background information to get a better understanding of how methyl bromide is used and where the emissions might be coming from. After we developed a monitoring strategy to better understand how methyl bromide emissions might affect air quality downwind of where the emissions are likely occurring. Next slide. So also as part of the background, one of the sources of information that we reviewed when developing a monitoring strategy was the South Coast AQMD's Multiple Air Toxics Emissions Study, often called MATES, always called MATES, really. This is a program that the Air District conducts to evaluate long-term concentrations of air toxics in residential and commercial areas. In this program, South Coast AQMD conducts detailed monitoring at 10 sites across the South Coast Basin. This data is used to update emissions inventories and support modeling and risk assessment efforts to evaluate health risks. The most recent MATES study, MATES 5, took place between 2018 and 2019. Here in this slide, we've included a map of the locations where monitoring took place. It's in the top right, as you can see, and monitoring occurred throughout the South Coast Basin, including West Long Beach. One of the over 100 air toxics that they measured is methyl bromide. The figure shows a list of locations where methyl bromide was measured and the average concentration of methyl bromide that was measured during the MATES 5 study. In this plot, longer bars represent greater average concentrations of methyl bromide, and the location with the greatest concentration of methyl bromide was West Long Beach. It's often referred to as the Hudson site, so I'll probably refer to it by both. However, it's important to note that the average concentration at the West Long Beach site during the study period was 1.14 parts per billion, or ppb, as you'll see in many of the slides today. It's important to keep this number in mind as we discuss the results from CARB's monitoring program in the next few slides. For now, please note that these concentrations indicated that methyl bromide was likely in use near the monitoring site and ultimately helped inform our monitoring strategy that we developed. Next slide. So now, after the community brought up methyl bromide as a potential concern, CARB staff conducted background research to understand how methyl bromide is used in or near the West Long Beach area. Our background research identified 2 commodity fumigation facilities in the area. The LA County Agricultural Commission issues restricted materials permits to facilities that use methyl bromide for commodity fumigation. The fumigation of agricultural and other natural resource commodity imports and exports is required by federal regulations. So when fumigation is conducted, the commodities are covered with tarps inside of a warehouse building. Then the fumigant, methyl bromide here, is pumped into the space under the tarp and allowed to work for a set number of hours. And this varies by the commodity that's being fumigated. Finally, the methyl bromide is vented out of the building through a stack to keep the plume of methyl bromide above ground level. In the case of AG fume and SP fume, this venting is done after 6 p.m. when workers leave. Recent permit data shows that the season of high fumigation activity occurs between February and May. And as we go through this presentation, you'll notice that these timeframes line up well with our observations of methyl bromide. Next slide. Okay. Now, using the information from the MATES study and after evaluating local wind patterns, CARB established a temporary air monitoring site in West Long Beach. This slide shows the location of our air monitoring site as well as a few other locations of interest. CARB's monitoring site is located in the top right of the figure, just north of South Coast AQMD's West Long Beach Hudson site. And if you recall, this was the site that had the greatest concentration of methyl bromide measured during the MATES 5 study at just over 1 part per billion. You can also see that there are facilities, AG Fume and SP Fume, that are permitted to use methyl bromide to the west of our monitoring site. These locations are between 200 to 400 yards away from our site across the Terminal Island Freeway. Now, this is important because as you can see from the arrow at the bottom left of the slide, the predominant wind comes in from the west and southwest. This means that our monitoring site is generally downwind of the two facilities. CARB established this temporary air monitoring site in January of 2023. For this work, we deployed an instrument that measures methyl bromide continuously. That means we are measuring methyl bromide approximately every hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This allows us to look at changes in concentrations more frequently than other methods. Next slide. Okay, now here's an example of what we can see with the hourly measurements. We're finally getting to the data from our continuous instrument. This is a figure that shows hourly methyl bromide concentrations from January of 2023 on the left, and it extends through May of 2024 to the right. Concentrations are shown in brown and range from 0 parts per billion at the bottom of the axis line on the graph to 1,000 parts per billion at the top. Now, this data represents over 10,000 measurements over the course of 16 months. The first thing that we notice is that methyl bromide concentrations are almost always close to 0. We also noticed that elevated concentrations were transient. That means we observed elevated concentrations for about an hour that would quickly drop back down to background concentrations over the next 2 to 3 hours. This is in line with typical plume behavior as plumes quickly move in the air and dissipate as they dilute into the atmosphere. We also observed that most of the elevated concentration events occurred during the springtime months of February through May. This suggested to us that most of the methyl bromide usage occurred during this time. In other words, emissions appeared to have a seasonality to them. If you could transition the slide. Towards the end of February 2024 and in early March, we observed 2 hourly concentrations approaching 1,000 parts per billion. We highlight this because 1,000 parts per billion is the value of the acute reference exposure level, which our colleagues from the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, OEHA, will discuss later. Taking all of the more than 10,000 measurements collected between January of 2023 and April of 2024, we calculated an average concentration of 2.1 parts per billion. These results will also be discussed by our colleagues at OEHA later in this presentation. So now to summarize the results from this plot, methyl bromide concentrations are quite low, at less than 1 part per billion for 93% of the measurements. They are transient in nature, they peak and quickly fall off. And most of the elevated concentration occurs during the spring months. Also, while this graph goes through May of 2024, I do want to stress that we are continuing monitoring and plan to continue as long as we are able to at our current location. Next slide. Now, one of the unique things we can do with hour-by-hour continuous data is to identify patterns of when elevated concentration events are happening during the day. For example, here in this graph, we evaluated when events greater than 100 parts per billion were taking place. This figure shows the number of elevated concentration events that we observed by hour of the day. We have midnight, starting with midnight on the far left of the bottom, and all moving through the day to 11 p.m. to the far right. The resulting bars represent the number of events that happened, with a longer bar representing more events. So as you can see, with over, again, 10,000 hourly measurements, most of the elevated concentration events occurred between the hours of 6 p.m. and midnight. We did observe one event that occurred during 3 and 4 p.m. And as we looked into this, we determined that this took place on a Sunday. So we wanted to share this figure to highlight that we didn't observe any events greater than 100 parts per billion taking place during school hours. So now with that, I will pass on the microphone to my colleague with DPR, MeBr, and he will describe how concentrations differ across the community.
Good evening again. As we heard from Adolfo, there have been concern about exposure to methyl bromide. In this case, the first step is conduct additional evaluation, which is site and condition specific. As part of the additional evaluation, we used local weather data, we used facilities information, their location, the amount of methyl bromide used in each of those facilities, and their timing as our input to the modeling. I was told to slow down, so I'm just slowing down. The modeling showed that the two nearby facilities are the likely contributor of the observed concentration of methyl bromide. The model also conservatively estimates concentrations at different distances from the source. Based on the modeling data, at this point, based on our analysis, it shows that the concentration decreases as distance increases from the source. For example, the air concentration at Hudson Elementary School are considerably below the health protective level. In terms of our modeling work, we validated our modeling by comparing the estimated concentrations from our model and the monitored data from CARB monitoring locations. That was our validation process. Through that process, we considered uncertainty in the weather data and also the timing of the emission from those facilities. As we went through this step, you heard me about the health protective levels. So I'm going to pass it on to Paulo to talk about those health protective levels.
Thank you, MeBr, for talking about the modeling. So you probably have heard the term throughout the presenters, the health protective level. So I'm going to discuss what are reference exposure levels or RELs. So RELs are health protective levels or guidelines for chemicals in the air that are set by the California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or OEHA for short, which is the agency that I work for. And essentially are the levels of chemicals or the level of an amount of a chemical that can be in the air that people can be exposed to without expecting any non-cancer health effects, meaning anything but cancer, asthma, respiratory effects, other things like cancer. There are two types of these health protective values. The first one is the acute REL, and we're going to call it the short-term health protective level. So short-term is for short-term situations, like a one-time fumigation, one-time temporary release of pesticides. For example, a fumigation in a neighborhood, and this can happen within the span of 1 hour or 24 hours. So something immediate, something short. That's the short-term health protective level. The second is the chronic REL, and we're going to call it the long-term exposure, the long-term health protective level. So this is for long-term exposures. This health protective level is, for example, if you live near a busy road or an industrial area that has constant, frequent exposure to pollutants. So over the course of several months or years, that's what we consider long-term exposure. So these levels ensure the health protective level for people who are regularly exposed. These two levels consider sensitive populations like children and pregnant people. Next slide. So what does the air monitoring of methyl bromide tells us in regards to the protective levels, the health protective levels that we're talking about? So air monitoring allows us to determine or evaluate whether the short-term and the long-term health protective levels have or were exceeded and analyze that. So in terms of the long-term health protective level at the annual level for the year long, the air monitoring results showed a concentration average for the entire year of 2.1 parts per billion for methyl bromide, which is the measurement for methyl bromide. And the health protective level for long-term exposure for methyl bromide is 1. So in this case, the health protective level was exceeded. So what does that mean in terms of health impacts? So when the health protective level for long-term exposure is exceeded, health impacts can increase, or the likeliness of experiencing health impacts such as impacts on the nervous system or developmental challenges once that health protective level is exceeded, especially and more important populations such as children and pregnant women. So I want to emphasize the REL was exceeded for the long-term exposure, long-term health protective level for methyl bromide was exceeded. The acute level or the short-term health protective level, so some air samples between 2023 and April 2024 almost reached the health protective level for short-term exposure. So for example, for the threshold, the health protective level for short-term is 1,000. And we saw a concentration of 983 on February 29, 2024, and a concentration of 966 on March 5th, 2024. So these two concentrations during those 2 days almost reach the limit, the health protective level for short-term exposure. And what are the health impacts associated with exposure to a health protective level above that short-term exposure? So that it can increase any health impacts that can be immediate symptoms such as dizziness, headaches, nausea, and difficulty breathing. So one big question is whether methyl bromide causes cancer or not. And currently there isn't enough scientific evaluation and evidence yet to determine if methyl bromide causes cancer. However, as we discussed above, there are long-term and short-term non-cancer effects associated with exposure to methyl bromide's health protective levels. And I'll pass it to Ian to talk a little bit more about hazardous index.
Okay, thank you, Paula. Really appreciate that. So you're getting a lot of data tonight. You're getting a lot of numbers thrown at you tonight. What I'm going to try to do on this slide, on slide 18, is to provide a little bit of context for thinking how to think about this in one's daily life. And I'm trying to do that with a graph, which is really tough, right? It's more numbers, it's more science, but I'm going to try to walk through it with you all so that we can try to understand and just try to help inform ourselves a little more. So one thing that is really clear here in Long Beach, there's a lot of pollution around here, right? I mean, this is not something that is unfamiliar to our community. And there's a lot of different pollutants that are out there. We're talking about one of them right now, methyl bromide, from this one particular facility. You saw an earlier slide 14, showed a map of where an impact area is. It's a block or two radius that we're talking about for this impact. What is shown on this graph is something called the hazard index, and these bars that you see there as they go up, the hazard index is very similar to what Paolo was talking about. This is something where a level of 1 on that indicates a health impact is possible, including for sensitive populations like children. Anything below 1, you would not expect a health impact. Anything above 1, the higher above 1, the higher the risk, the greater the possibility that there could be a health impact. So the two bars on the left are looking only at this one pollutant, methyl bromide, and that's looking at the monitoring that was conducted already. So you see the one on the far left, you see there's a number there, it says 1.6. And if you can't see it up on the screen behind me, it's on the chart right in front of you on the paper. That 1.6 says, okay, that's over 1, similar to what we were just saying, that the monitored levels are above that health protective threshold for this one pollutant at that monitor, which is immediately downwind of this facility. When we monitored just one property away in 2018, 2019 period, Same pollutant, methyl bromide. We found that the hazard index from that one pollutant was just under 1. Still a little high, certainly, but it was under 1. Now, then the context I want to try to provide are the 2 bars that are on the right side of this graph. And what these show are, let's look at all the pollutants, right? Not just methyl bromide, but what about other stuff? Diesel particulate matter, that's a real concern. Benzene, arsenic, or what other, pollutants that are out there. And we look at all of those. That's what these bars are showing. And they show both in the West Long Beach community, that's the left one, and that's it says 5.8. And then the one on the right shows on average across our entire region, LA County, Orange County, Inland Empire, et cetera. And that's looking at all pollutants. And we say, okay, on average, everybody, every day, breathes air that has this hazard index of about 5.5. That's not great. We want it lower, absolutely, right? But I just want to provide that little bit of context of the air that we see here in West Long Beach, including with methyl bromide, on average is about the same as what we see across the entire basin. The range that we see everywhere is about 4.5 to 8. So we're within that range. It's a little bit elevated relative to the average that you would see, but I'm trying to provide that context because there's a lot of numbers and how do we understand this? So that's I'm hoping that helps. And if there's questions afterwards, there's going to be plenty of time to talk through that. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back to Paula.
Thanks, Ian. So regarding exposure, I'm going to discuss the steps that you can take to reduce your risk. So methyl bromide, as mentioned before by Adolfo, is a pesticide that is odorless unless the concentrations are very, very, very high, in which case it has a sweet, fruity smell. So if you think you've been exposed or feel unwell, please contact your doctor or poison control, and the number is in the slides. The number is 1-800-222-1222 for free advice. But also if you live near the areas where the methyl bromide or other pesticides are being used and you're concerned about being exposed and you already heard about the health protective levels and exposure, one thing you can do to limit or reduce your exposure is to close windows and doors, especially in the evenings between February and May, when and if feasible. And with that, I'll pass it to Max to finish the presentation.
Thank you. So my name is Max. I work for the County of Los Angeles, and I'm here to talk to you about the permitting process for the use of this pesticide. It is our responsibility. We're the sort of the boots on the ground that does the permitting for these facilities. With that said, we enforce codes and regulations set forth by the Department of Pesticide Regulation. And I just reminded myself to slow down. So our job is to visit these facilities and see if they have the right conditions to use these pesticides. We meet with the different facility owners, the different applicators that are there, and we do site inspections, we do records inspections. So what have they done throughout the year? We make sure that all the data that needs to be collected from them is collected. We also we check the records of the folks that work at the facility because they have to have annual medical records in order to use respirators. So all this to say, we have a broad range of activities that we look for while we're enforcing guidelines from the Department of Pesticide Regulation. So once these conditions are met, and these are all set forth by the guidelines, what we do is if a permit is issued, the facility is then required to give us a notice of intent. And that is a notification that comes to my department the day before the pesticide is used. That gives us the ability to then go to the facility the next day if we need to do an inspection and also keep track of what's being used. Now, an NOI is not necessarily 100% assuring us that there is going to be a pesticide treatment the next day. They could cancel that treatment, but they're alerting us that they are intending to do that work. Next slide, please. So my department found out about, or I first became aware of this situation back in July of 2024. We started working with the different agencies that are here to see how we can amend the permits and do work around that. So we've been in communication with USDA, which is the United States Department of Agriculture. They're the ones that require that these treatments be done. So this is a federal requirement. We've been working with CARB. They've been giving us technical advice. South Coast AQMD, also technical advice, and the Department of Pesticide Regulation, who also has given us technical advice and also legal guidance. So what we have done is we've reviewed the data that was presented earlier. We saw the same data that you saw. We met with the fumigators. So these would be the two facilities that are in question here. And I want to say that they have been incredibly helpful and are part of the process. They themselves don't want to hurt anybody in the community. No one is in the business of hurting someone. So they have been very compliant and working with us to amend these permits so that we can have a different outcome. So from there, we continue to work with the different facilities to evaluate and make changes to the permit condition. So this was all done. We met with the facilities in December, early December of 2024. We worked with all the agencies up here through the month of December to come up with, look at the modeling and come up with different restrictions that we can apply to these permits. Next slide, please. So the slide you're looking at behind me shows what the plume of methyl bromide was with the equipment that they had in place in 2024 and before. As you can see, it sort of drifts to the east into the community. And for simplicity's sake, we didn't add any colors or it's just showing the plume itself. So one of the things we learned early on in the process is that if the stacks, and a stack is a chimney, if these stacks are raised at a higher altitude and we include a faster fan, it'll send that chemical higher up into the atmosphere and then not drifting down to the community in the same way that it was doing before. So that the second model that you're looking at is what it's expected to happen with these higher stacks and the faster fans. So we wrote that into the permit condition. The facilities are working to make those changes. We expect those changes to be implemented before the end of this month, which actually we're at the end of the month. We expect these changes to be implemented probably within the next week or so, maybe next week. So I think everyone's working fast to get this work done and introduce these new fans. So that's one of the first permit conditions. Next slide, please. We also have worked with the facilities to change the time of applications. So now we are requiring that they adhere to doing treatments after 6 p.m. So what that is intended so that no treatments are taking place during school hours. The other requirement that we have put in place is making sure that they close all the doors to the facility. So in the past, the doors were left open in order to aerate, so that the pesticide wouldn't be in the facility. But what had happened when they do that is that the pesticide then escapes out the bay doors and sort of moves laterally. So by closing the doors and then venting that straight up through the chimney, through the stack, that'll reduce fugitive emissions. So that's an important addition. We have also asked these facilities to increase their record keeping and make that available to us so that we can see at our level what is being used on a daily basis. So I can share with you that the way the reporting is done currently, and that's by the law set forth by the state of California, is that they report to us monthly use. So if you were to ask me how much did they use in January, well, I would give you a round number. They used 100 pounds or 1,000 pounds, but I couldn't tell you what they use on a daily basis. So by changing that, we now have the ability to look at the data from CARB, look at the usage on a daily basis, and then have those correlations there in place. That had already been in place because USDA requires that of them, but that was not a requirement that they share that data with us. So now it is. Another permit condition that we changed that didn't make it onto the slide is we reduced the daily usage of pesticide that they're allowed to use. So initially it was 1,000 pounds per day. They could use up to 1,000 pounds of pesticide a day of the methyl bromide, and that's been reduced now to 200 pounds per day. And lastly, we're asking that, so these questions had come in earlier regarding the facilities. How many of these chambers do they have? Fumigation chambers? They have 2 chambers in each facility. And when the facilities would do the work at the same time, meaning let's say they started at 6 p.m. and they introduce the pesticide into both chambers at the same time, they then wait 3 hours. There's a USDA inspector there that is taking temperatures, making sure that the treatment is being done correctly. I remind you, again, this is a federal requirement that all produce coming into the United States be fumigated before it makes it into the market. So at 9 p.m., both those chambers would then be vented. So what would happen is the amount of pesticide being put into the atmosphere at the same time is greater than if we stagger it. So now we are asking that they start an hour apart so that the venting of the fumigation is not done at the same time. And the next steps from here are to continue with the monitoring to see what results we get from all these permit conditions that we have added. And that concludes my slide, and I pass it over to Ian. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Max. We're almost at the end, so I'll try to be quick here while slow at the same time. So there's a lot of regulations you've heard about today. There are other regulations that AQMD also has under our purview. So we have the air toxic hotspots program. I'm not going to go into the details here. If there are questions afterwards, feel free to ask, but just suffice it to say, we do require emissions reporting. And so we have notified these facilities that they need to report their emissions to us. And then that will proceed on to the next steps in that air toxic hotspots program. We have also reached out to all other fumigation facilities, working with the agricultural commissioner to identify all of those facilities and make sure that we're capturing all of those other facilities and understanding what's happening there as well. We have no indication right now to believe that there's this kind of situation happening at any other facility, but we do want to go and do the due diligence to go through all of that. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Kevin or Adolfo.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. So now we'll describe the next steps for CARB. Over the coming months, at CARB, we're going to continue to engage with our agency partners here. Thank you. Okay, I'll start over. So what are the next steps here at CARB? Over the coming months, we're going to continue to engage with our agency partners here to address the ground level methyl bromide concentrations. So this will definitely involve continuing to monitor for methyl bromide and providing that data to our partner agencies to track the effectiveness of the changes, specifically that Max had talked about to facility operations. We'll also make that data available to the community, to the public, to you, by developing a live dashboard that will be accessible through our website. And I believe that's going to be live, if not already, very soon. And that dashboard will provide hourly data with a comparison to the acute REL and the most up-to-date long-term average methyl bromide concentration, updated continuously as new data is collected. And so in the image of the dashboard on the slide, that's the center box. So that will provide that comparison to the chronic REL. And also the dashboard will provide a view of the monthly average concentrations so that you, the community, can also see the impact of the updated facility operations over time. Next slide. So now, in closing, we ask you to visit our methyl bromide website to find more information on the monitoring in West Long Beach. And you can access our live dashboard through the website for the latest methyl bromide concentrations. And that will include a link to download the actual data that we presented to you today. There are also steps listed on the website that you can take to reduce your risk of exposure. And there's background information on the regulation of methyl bromide in Los Angeles County. And so with that, I will pass the mic back to Lamika and Kevin, our co-facilitators.
Thank you. Sorry, I realized I'm supposed to pass this mic actually to somebody else. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you all so much for those presentations. Again, a lot of data, right? A lot of information, a lot of numbers, a lot of big words for me. And so we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to ask your questions to get a better sense of what it is that you want to know about what this means for you and your community, your health, all the things that you came here for today. So we are going to open it up to questions and comments. And we do, I want to acknowledge first that on the Zoom, we are what is it called? It's a hybrid meeting. Thank you. And we're broadcasting this to Zoom, and there are 120 people on the Zoom, and we already have, it looks like about a dozen questions on Zoom as well. And so we want to be able to go back and forth with the questions and comments from the folks who are here joining us virtually, as well as the folks who are in the room. Also want to acknowledge that we are having simultaneous translation taking place. And so I'm just putting this all back out there because I know it could feel a little bit slow and you want to get your question answered and we want to be able to answer the question. And I just want to be mindful of the fact that we have folks who are listening and, you know, trying to interpret for other people to be able to understand in their language. And so we just got to slow down, myself included, be mindful of all of these different dynamics at play. And then also that we're all here trying to figure this out together. So please be respectful of each other, and every emotion that you have is valid. I just want to say that right now. Every emotion that you feel is valid. Okay. So I'm going to turn it over first to Ricardo, right? Who's going to open us up with a comment, and then I'll come over here to Carlos before going on to the Zoom.
Hey, gracias, Lamika. Buenas noches. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ricardo Polito. I'm on the board with CFASE, and I'm here. First of all, I want you to all know on behalf of Jesse Marquez, who's in the hospital right now. He had a car accident, and he's stable, but he's not out of the woods, so we need your prayers. We want to make sure that you understand, like Thorough said a few words about him. We take a little moment of silence for Jesse, for his recuperation and for his recovery, because everybody on the Zoom knows that Jesse has been the spearhead of this meeting for tonight. If it wasn't for Jesse, we wouldn't have all the heads here from the agencies. We wouldn't be where we're at tonight. And that's why we want to make sure that he gets his acknowledgement, not so much for him steering. He's been doing CFASA for over 25 years, but for the families and communities of West Long Beach area, Carson and the whole South Bay area, because, you know, through the plumes, like they said earlier, the westerlies come, and we don't know how far these agents, fumigants and the toxins could be hitting our families. I like what Max said about some of the things that are mitigating, but it's just not enough. We need a bandit. That's what Jesse told me to tell you guys when I met with him last week. He had a complete report and a data analysis, and he asked me to make sure that all of you are aware that we need a HIAs, the health impact assessments. We did these in Wilmington, and we did them for quite a while in a different for the ports, for the diesel, idling and whatnot. And now we need to do it here for the people that are impacted within a half-mile radius of Hudson schools and of all that periphery of that area. see what's going on in the community. So this is a good start. I know this lady right here will make sure that those surveys are going to be done so we can see who is really impacted and who has asthma, who has respiratory disease, who has problems now, not only breathing, but thinking with the nervous systems. I'm also a mental health advocate, and we believe the correlation with mental health and environmental pollutants are very affecting our families and their minds. So a little bit real quickly, I know I don't have too much time, but Kevin said I could speak a little bit for a second about Jesse. Jesse, not only the founder of CFASE, but he was a banning and raised right there in Wilmington. He was affected with the Fletcher's fires for his family directly back in the day. So Jesse's been a steerhead and a man of movement for many years. He's traveled the world. He's been to ports all over Russia, Japan, China, and Washington, D.C., as well as up and down here the coast. Just so you know that Jesse's a gifted young man, and we should keep him in your prayers. He's a man that stands for justice for the families, for the grassroots. He has no qualm with speaking up and being here if he had to and letting the agencies have it, if you will, but in a professional manner, in a way that they know he means business because he comes with his facts and figures. If you get a chance, I would like you all to read his article because this was at Random Lengths on January 9th. Tells you about the China monitoring the shipping yards. No credit was given to who started this, along with the Harbor Community Benefits Agreements, along with CBAs that him and I done with Kinder Morgan, CBA's Community Benefits Agreements now that they're utilizing as a mitigating factor throughout the regions and throughout the world now. Jesse and others, okay, slow down, she says. All right. I get a little passionate like Jesse. I feel his spirit right now as I speak. But Jesse is, he's a walking knowledge of, and he's educated, self-educated. He's probably his own best enemy as far as being able to, through legal matters. He's done many lawsuits and won them. The China shipping yard was number one. Norwalk, we had a big one with the refineries. We would have won, the judge says, but we didn't do administrative record. And we were there, David against Goliath. And Jesse and myself were there, and the judge says, boy, are you an attorney? He goes, no, I'm doing this pro per. And he says, you're doing a good job, young man, but get your administrative records. And so from there on, we always have administrative records for everything that we do when we file lawsuits. Lastly, I want to say, because, yeah, take a breather, Rick. Jesse's an archaeologist, amateur one. He's a study of Mayan and Azteca culture. He's a photographer. He did my daughter's quinceañera, and he does a lot of professional photography, like the burrowing owls in San Diego. When there was a problem over there, we were able to win that case for the Mesa airport. So we're all over. We fought right now with the ports of San Diego for Sandy Naranjo, who was a commissioner. You can look it up online. Now she's going through litigation. She's probably going to win back her seat for the stuff that they've done over there. So we're not only up and down the coast, here in California and Washington and abroad, like I said. I want to say that he was, not only the pioneer of right now today of methyl bromide, MeBr. He was also working with NASA right now. One of his last projects last year, him and his fiance went over to a meeting in Atlanta, and there in the NASA project was the first CBO ever to be invited to bring some of the correlation, scientific evidence that we do with our weather station up at CFASE on its roof. And we have our own dust monitors. We had fence line monitoring 15 years ago when the Port of LA said you can't do it, they can't afford it, they can't do nothing to help the community. Well, guess what? Everybody's doing it now. It's a new word. It's the hotspots that we talked about for 25 years. And these are things that are being implemented because the grassroots have been speaking, scientifically speaking, through La Vaca, through an East Yard, through CFASE, through the neighborhood councils, Janet Gunther, Dr. Miller, myself, Ricardo Polito from Carson, all of our neighboring cities. We're all in this together. And this fumigant right now is affecting people, and we know it has. So we want to have a study done, and this is one of the things Jesse mentioned to me, and I remember top of my head. He has the reports and everything in his computer. Unfortunately, we're not able to bring it all today, but we'll get it to the team here. They know him. They know we'll get it. He wants the HIAs, health impact assessments, done for all the people within that periphery of a half a mile. He also asked that we make sure, if we can, to make sure that we talk to the employees, because those employees now that the good man Max said they're going to start closing the doors. That stuff stays there. We don't know how fast it dissipates and goes up into the atmosphere. It could be there in that building. And when they start chantering and waiting an hour or longer, these employees, we want to know how it's affecting them. What are the studies on the employees? What are the studies on the children at Hudson? Why are we having these situations that we're having within the polluted area? Like Ian said, it's all over. But we could get rid of this if we work and think twice, and maybe moving this into a very desolate an area that's, out in the desert or something. I mean, I don't know where, but something where we don't have to have any fumigation within the urban cities. So he started also as part of the agreement.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I also do want to just make an acknowledgement. There's probably about 15 questions.
Okay,
and we're running a little
I'll
behind. So
finish.
thank you so much for
The last
sharing
thing I'll
all
just say, and thank you for telling me that, Kevin. I appreciate it, because he told me I had 15 minutes, but now I know I had 5 minutes. HCBFs, that's a Harbor Community Benefits Foundation. That was instrumental in the China shipping. And that foundation, you could go downtown to San Pedro. We have our headquarters there. When he founded that, that was meant to bring the monies into the agencies, like today, what we need here at West Long Beach. Funding so that we could do some tracking, so we could be the amateur scientists to help our brothers and sisters up here, because they have their hands full. They have a lot more than just our projects, but they do know this is the main one, and they're going to concentrate on it because you're here today. And all those folks on the Zoom that know us, they're all listening. They know that this is the time for change, time for environmental justice, racial justice, and for social justice. So God bless you, and thank you. And please pray for my carnal, for mi hermano Jesse Marquez. Buenas noches, Ricardo Pulido.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you very much. I had committed to hearing from Carlos next, and so I want to make sure I pass the mic to him. And there were a couple other hands. Joan had a hand up here. We also have, again, I think 12 or so questions on Zoom, so we're going to bring those in. Before folks come up to speak here in the room, I just want to remind everybody, including myself, please slow down as we speak, right? So that the interpreters can keep up with whatever we're saying and asking. When I mean slow down, I had to remind myself, this means that you got to take some breaths in between, right? So pause, because that gives the interpreters an opportunity to catch up, to say whatever you're saying to the folks who are trying to keep up as well and want to hear what you have to say. And they're members of the community who are just as interested in wanting to hear what you have to say as the folks who are here in the room. Okay? Can we agree to that? Yes? Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right, Carlos, I see you here. Let's have Carlos come up, and then we'll take questions from Zoom.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry, but I don't trust any of you. And the reason I don't is because what I hear is apologies. This stuff doesn't cause cancer. There are no, I believe it was you who said that. But what isn't mentioned is that according to the EPA, one of the biggest problems that this causes to a human body is neurological disorders and respiratory disorders. I don't know if you've paid attention to what I have here in front of me or next to me. A bunch of bottles of pills. This is what I live with every day. My respirators, my chemotherapy, not pictured is my radiation and hormone treatments. But the primary problem that I have as a longtime resident downwind of all the crap that we get from the ports, from the freeway, from the incinerator, from the refineries, from the petroleum coke facilities, is a neurological disorder that makes my legs begin to twitch uncontrollably, and that gets handled via these medications. It results in sleep deprivation. That is an irreversible neurological disorder that is environmental in nature. Beyond that, I couldn't believe what you guys were saying about venting, putting higher stacks and shooting the stuff higher up in the air. The other thing that EPA says is that ethyl bromide is one of the number one chemicals that causes depletion of the ozone layer, which results in a larger number of UV rays hitting the Earth's surface, which results in all sorts of other diseases like, skin melanoma, right? I mean, this is unbelievable. You guys are apologists for the industry. Basically, the EPA says again that there are alternatives, chemical and non-chemical alternatives to this pesticide. And why are they not being used? Because they're expensive. So in essence, those of us who suffer from all of this stuff that you see here, bottles and bottles of medicine, we are subsidizing with our health the profits of the industry that you guys appear to be defending. In the West Side, by the way, this is not the West Side. This is not the West Side. Okay? But you said it. This is not the West Side. The West Side is west of the freeway, west of the LA River. And there are many residents here from west of the LA River. We have anywhere between 5 to 15 years shortened lifespan. Okay? My days are numbered. I don't care about myself. It's too late for me. I lived a good life. I worry about my kids. I worry about my grandkids. And I know that many people here do. So, if it was up to me, you guys go back to the drawing board and do the right thing, not what is expedient, not what is profitable.
Thank you so much for sharing your sentiments, Carlos, and also for having this visual here. I think members in the community understand exactly what you're talking about in terms of the impacts that pollution in West Long Beach, and I mean actual West Long Beach, right? That it does have on community members. And I think it's really important for us to continue to have this conversation about what does it actually mean to address these issues in a real tangible way. And so I appreciate everything that you just shared about your own research and what the EPA says about methyl bromide and what does that actually mean, and asking the tough questions. I think we do have to ask those tough questions of why is it that, why are they not using the other options that are available? And I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to a question from Zoom, and then Joan over here had her hand up and asked me if she could ask a question next. So I actually took a look at some of those questions in advance, and there's someone on this. Oh, sorry, y'all, I'm not as mobile as I was before. But there was someone named Cynthia Babbage, I believe, who said, there was another one that she asked. Sorry, we're scrolling through the questions that were here. How long have the agencies known about this? When did Jesse tell you? That was one of the questions that was asked by Cynthia. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin and he'll.
Yeah, so I think this is an issue Jesse has been raising for about 10 years. I don't know the exact date of when the first person heard about it for the first time. I think it came more into our attention after the first time that it appeared in the MATES 5 study. And so I don't know if anybody at the table wants to answer, maybe South Coast, about the first time you all heard about this from Jesse.
I don't know the exact date on it. I mean, it's a good question, but I mean, we have the monitoring that we did in MATES 5 was from the 2018, 2019 timeframe. And that report was released in 2021. So 2 years.
Thank you. And there was a follow-up question that Cynthia, Cynthia? And she asked, so we are talking about long-term exposures, correct? Long-term exposures of primary area?
That's correct. And Paula, do you want to talk a little bit more about what we mean by that?
Sure. Just so to repeat, the long-term exposure, the long-term health protective values that OEHealth develops is for exposure through several months, several years, people who are regularly exposed, and those levels again consider sensitive populations like children and pregnant women. So yes, we're talking about both, but the health protective level for the long-term exposure that we mentioned, there was the average concentration was exceeded to 2.1 parts per billion. So yes, Cynthia.
Thank you. I realize that we also have folks with mics who can go out into the audience, so I will have to try to pull this cord and hopefully not flip over a table unintentionally. So June has a
hello. Before we move on to an in-person question, Joey King has had their hand raised for quite a while now. And so if we can give some time over to some Zoom people, please.
Yes, absolutely. Joan, we're going to take this question. Sorry, I can't see the Zoom hands. So we'll start there, and I apologize, but you're going to be next. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Is it Joey King?
Joey King, you are unmuted.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Joey King, the office of Senator Lena Gonzalez. Thank you for putting on this presentation for the public. I have a couple questions. It was a very detailed and lengthy presentation. I just kind of wanted to wrap a couple things up with a bowl if possible. So with methyl bromide, I know there's not necessarily a carcinogenicity that you need to be aware of or afraid of, but it's more of a neurological fear. And I just wondered, what long-term studies are you using in comparison to come up with the statement I heard earlier, which is I believe it was not. I'm not. I want to make sure I get the phrase properly, but I believe someone said that it wasn't really a big concern or something to that effect, and I just wanted to make sure I heard that properly, and if we have studies that we are referencing to come up with that comment. I think the exact comment was something like no immediate threat or danger. And since we're talking about long-term threats or dangers, I just wondered where that comment came from.
Thank you so much for that question, Joey. I'm going to kick it over to Paula, who can respond from the health perspective.
So thank you, Joey. So for long-term exposures, so there are many studies that I looked at through toxicology and epidemiology to drive these levels for health protective values for long-term exposure. So essentially, the longer you are exposed to the levels above the long-term health protective level, the higher your chances are for experiencing chronic long-term health effects. And the ones you mentioned are nervous system and neurological developmental issues. And these long-term exposure levels are compared to the average annual air concentration, meaning that many months or years of air monitoring data are needed to accurately estimate that type of exposure, which is what we did with this to get reference to this. And in terms of the studies, again, we use toxicology studies, epidemiology studies to develop these health protective levels. I don't know if that answered your question, Joey.
And I just want to add to that, Mr. King, to respond, because I was the one that said the comment about imminent health risk. And I want to clarify exactly what I mean by that, which is to say that when we've had conversations with people in preparing for this meeting, sometimes we've heard, people thinking that it should be shelter in place and that people, should be relocated. And we want to be clear that when we talk about risk, what we're talking about, like secondhand smoke, is breathing in low levels over long periods of time, just like Paula said, increases your risk. And so we just want people to understand exactly what the level of risk is and that we characterize it accurately. And so I'm sorry if I made any confusion, but that was my intent from that statement.
Thank you. Is this a new hand from Joey? Was that the same? Okay. Joey, I think I heard you say that you had more than one question. Is that right? Or did you have another question?
Yeah, I was trying to unmute. Sorry about that. So not necessarily another question. It's a follow-up to the original question. Thank you for the clarity on the original statement. I think that the folks in the room may have a different idea on what is a threat or not a threat or something to be concerned about. So thank you for the clarity on the original statement. If at all possible, I don't see an option for me to drop my email in the chat. I'd love to know what studies are being used for comparison.
Yeah, I can answer that, Mr. King. We can find you your email and follow up with you, and we can share that information with you via email as soon as possible.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll follow up with you before the end of the week.
All right, I appreciate that. And thank you everyone for taking the time to face the music, so to speak.
I just want to say I heard a comment in the audience that a lot of the people here would like to know that information. And so that we can work, we did develop a website. There's a QR code and a link on the presentation that has access to that. And we can work to summarize those key findings and materials. But a lot of those are linked on that website. But anything else that we can add to it, we'll make sure to do that expediently.
Thank you. Let's get over here to Ms. Joan, who's been waiting patiently as well, and then we'll go back to comments in the chat.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Joan Greenwood. I live in Southwest Wrigley. I'm president of the Wrigley Area Neighborhood Alliance, and we are in an equally devastating health risk area as the people who reside on the west side of the river. I'm the president of the organization, but I'm also a member of the West Long Beach Association. But I have to confess that as an analytical chemist and environmental consulting, to switch to environmental consulting, air toxics is not my primary area of expertise. But I will tell you, I have the greatest respect for these amateur scientists who took this problem, brought it to the attention, found it. So I kind of backed off on air toxics for the last 10 years. But what shocks me, and I think I'll explain it through this, if I had a client coming to me, which we've had, and they want to permit a new facility. And in permitting that new facility, what's the first thing we ask them? What chemical processes are going to be going on in your facility? Is it going to cause a stormwater runoff problem? Is it going to cause a wastewater problem? Air emissions? So what would we tell our client? The best thing before you go for your permit, assume the harm and mitigate. And I would have told these facilities, you are dealing with a highly toxic material. And guess what? There is technology available for treating your emissions up that pipe. It's called activated carbon. So I see a permit, and what really shocked me was that the Los Angeles County Agricultural Commission is in charge of the permitting for something that's emitting these toxic materials. That I do not understand, because we all know site inspections don't do the job. I can tell you when we go in to do SUMA canister monitoring of places, they know we're coming in, and the night before they open up all those doors to clear out the fumes. Also, I don't see Cal OSHA and a certified industrial hygienist on the team. Because again, it's very easy to do personal monitoring. The second thing I always look at when I was trained in how to do health risk assessments, was, okay, what are the biological pathways? And I know that most of these numbers that you're coming up with your RELs and your chronic, this is based on worker exposures. We're talking about kids and they're relative. It was the means of deciding, okay, now that we have all these regulations, how are we going to prioritize the work? Because we know they never give the enforcers enough money to do the job. So that's why I say these amateur scientists, I am so impressed by what they've done. And you do not have to have a PhD to be an expert as an expert witness in litigation. So my other question is, how much pollution liability insurance are you requiring these facilities to have as part of your permitting? Why aren't you requiring that they put in activated carbon entrapment? Because here's what happens when we get down to the kids and the individuals. When the biochemical reaction occurs, yeah, we could say your risk is 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 100, but it's still a risk to the individual. We're talking about children and their lungs. Now, methyl bromide breaks down very quickly in the atmosphere because its main breakdown is hydrolysis. And then it can react with other air toxins that we've got in our basin that make it even worse. And most of the health risk assessments aren't so good at doing cumulative and understanding all that. So I look at it, what's happening inside that child's lungs? It goes into the lungs. It has a 12-day half-life. That means half of what they've inhaled within 12 days, it hits in there, bouncing around their bodies, hitting DNA, hitting other vital functions. And again, our knowledge has increased. And I have read where, yes, methyl bromide has been associated with carcinogenic properties because it breaks down into methanol. Methanol, of course, we know from the bathtub gin operations that they'd use methanol instead of ethanol, and it would poison people immediately. So what's going on in an individual's body is far worse than what we can do. We can say, well, they're inhaling this much methyl bromide and this much sulfur dioxide, this much of that, this much of everything else. Now they're all combining. And again, it's bouncing around in that body with a 12-day half-life, which is not typically brought into the calculations that these health risk models use. And that's why I would say to my clients, assume the harm and mitigate. You've got to put in the treatment. You cannot release this into the environment, because the same thing when you look at the plume, we've got moist air, that marine layer, it breaks it down into other toxics. It absorbs onto all the particulates that we breathe in. It gets in the superficial soils. So you can't use the models alone. Assume the harm and mitigate to the maximum extent possible, and make these companies carry pollution liability insurance if they violate your rules and your permits. But the permits have to be much, much more strict than this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Joan. And I'm going to be honest, I was struggling to keep up with everything, because obviously there's so much brilliance and knowledge that you have, like real subject matter expertise. And I was also thinking about the interpreters, because you are fiery and passionate, and I love it. And I was like, how are they keeping up with this? And then when you add the science in there, I don't know. But what I do know is what you just mentioned at the end, the summary of what you gave is so critical, right, for the panel up here. And I wanted to see if anybody had a response.
I think we can summarize. There's sort of 3 types of questions that you asked about. One, if the agencies have looked into alternatives and also mitigation elements like carbon filters.
The addition
for permitting, exactly.
Before permitting is what?
Before permitting, and we'll make sure that Max and Ian have a chance to answer that. There was also a question and a concern about worker safety. And then also, I think just more fundamental questions about how the reference exposure level, which is what we use to, what we've been referring to as the health protective levels, are calculated. and specifically questions around what we know and don't know about cancer risk from methyl bromide. So maybe we could start with the questions about how these facilities have been permitted and any alternatives have been looked into for mitigation. And we'll start with Max.
Thank you. So yeah, the facilities are permitted with guidelines that are set forth by DPR. And have we looked at alternatives for capturing the gas? No, we have not. That's something that we have discussed with the other experts on here. They would have more expertise on that. From what I've been told, it creates other sorts of pollution that then has to be dealt with. And that's one of the main reasons why it has not been implemented. It's also, from what I understand, it's expensive. So, but Ian, I'll let you talk to that.
Yeah, I'll say that we did discuss this briefly with the facilities to just raise the question about things like carbon absorption or other kinds of technologies for controls. I think the facilities have looked into it. I'm not sure, actually. I don't know if any facility representatives are in the room right now, or if there's any on Zoom that would want to speak to this, because they have done some looking into it. But I think some of this also gets back to the standards that are set for how to do permitting and how to do health risk assessment, and how is that incorporated into the permitting decisions, because there's methyl bromide and the next facility is another pollutant and the next facility is another pollutant. And so how are all those standards set? So it's kind of ties into on the RELs and on how you do these assessments. What are the studies that are used? Because that is what sets the standards for what is required in permits. So we're actually kind of aligned just right to kind of talk about that next step, because that really informs the permitting decisions.
So thank you, Joan. Brilliant. And I appreciate your comments. So for OIHA, we carefully review the scientific evidence from using studies in humans, both in humans and in animals, to determine what health effects the chemicals may cause and how much the chemical needs to be breathed in to increase the chances of causing those health effects, both at the short term and the long term exposure, keeping in mind that some people, as you mentioned, children are especially vulnerable. So there are multiple safety factors that are added into the calculation. But I will say that this health risk assessment do not include the cumulative aspect that you mentioned, and that is a limitation that exists currently within the development of this, and something to definitely take into consideration. I know my technical expertise is online. I don't know if Rima Woods can maybe answer or complete the question, but that is correct. That's something that is a limitation of the process, and it's something that OE has been looking at in terms of cumulative impacts and how to consider how all of those impact health. So,
yeah, thanks, Paula. Rima Woods with OEHA. You did a great job, Paula, of sort of summarizing that. We look at all of the available scientific evidence, so studies in humans, of course, occupational studies, and other types of studies in humans. We also look at all the available information from experimental animals when we're looking at the health effects from these chemicals and trying to determine what level needs to be breathed in, again, for some of those, to cause some of those health effects. I will just touch on the question of cancer as well. So Paula did mention that we don't have enough information to determine if methyl bromide causes cancer. There is some potential, but it hasn't been listed under California's Proposition 65 program. There is some data, but there are conflicting studies that we see. There are a few studies in humans that indicate there may be an association, but again, there's some conflicting evidence. So really, the bottom line is that we, at this point, don't have enough information to determine if it does cause cancer or not. And I hope that answers the question regarding the cancer effects.
Thank you. We want to turn to a question from a hand that's raised on the Zoom. Jill Johnston. You can unmute yourself and we'll bring you into the conversation.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Dr. Jill Johnston. I'm faculty in environmental health at Keck School of Medicine of USC. I just wanted to add a little bit to the conversation about health studies and health impacts. So one, I think it's important to know that there have not been comprehensive health studies focused on methyl bromide exposure to children. And so I appreciate that there are safety factors in the reference values, but it's also important to know that our knowledge is really limited because this has not been studied. Secondly, just to add to what Owiha just mentioned, my understanding is that methyl bromide is on the Prop 65 list, just not as a carcinogen, but I think as a reproductive toxicant. So maybe we can get clarity there, or maybe I'm mistaken.
Oh, no, thank you for clarifying that. You are correct. It is listed under Prop 65 for reproductive and developmental effects, but not for cancer. So thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you. Just so we're all on the same page. And one other thing I just wanted to maybe caution against is that when we compare the health risk factors from one chemical in a community that we know is disproportionately burdened by multiple chemicals and so face these high health burdens, sometimes then that is used as a justification for not mitigating these risk factors. And so I just think it's really important that we use cumulative burden in a way that prompts more action because a community faces multiple risks rather than as an excuse not to do anything because there's so many other factors that are impacting the community. And lastly, I don't want to get into details on the exposure modeling here, but if someone, I would love to follow up and just learn more about how that is being done. And finally, just recommend to add a MET station. So add information about wind direction to the monitoring station that you have set up, because I think that will help provide additional information to understand where the sources may be coming from. And I'll stop there. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Jill. I wanted to turn back to the room to see if we had any other questions. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Golden had.
Lamika, we did have a few raised hands over here from earlier.
Okay. And then we'll come back to Mr. Golden. Sorry, can if you raise your hand if you have a question? I'm also looking at the time. How many folks have questions or comments? Okay, great. So I see about 6 or 7 hands, and just being respectful and folks' time, we have about 5 minutes left, but we are open to staying longer. I haven't talked to the panelists about this, but this is obviously a very critical conversation for the community, and we want to make sure that you get your questions answered here, or you put your comment on the table. Are folks okay with staying a little bit longer? Yes? Excellent. And if you're not able to stay and you have a question, please raise your hand now so we can go to you first if you have to leave to put your question out there. All right. And please remember to introduce yourself, say your name so that the interpreters can also introduce you when you share your comment. Thank you.
Hello. Mine's more of a comment than a question. My name's Irene, and I'm with the Long Beach Alliance for Children with Asthma. And I work with families in West Long Beach that have children with asthma. And all this is very alarming. I mean, it's hard to even think how I am going to relate these messages, all these findings to our families. It is, I know all this is, it's just hard to explain all these pesticides apart from already them having all these other issues, health issues, and still adding more burden to the families. So I did hear something that really bothered me that said that you were going to ask facilities to bring levels down and have a dashboard. I don't think that is I think it's kind of a weak plan of action. I would just would love to hear more of a solution, a solid solution that I can go back to families and tell them what the solution will be. It's something more immediate than long-term. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Irene, right? Was that? Thank you, Irene. Did any of our panelists have a response? Concrete solution?
Yeah, I just want to turn it over to Max Regis with the Agricultural Commissioner's Office. I think that was in regards to his statement. Max?
Yeah, I think I can speak to that. I mean, So the changes that we made, first of all, let's see what law and what authority do I have to do the work that I do. So I'm bound by that authority. I can't just come up and say, hey, stop this because I don't like it, or stop it because there might be health effects. We have to look at the science. That's what this panel here provides. And then we look at the legal authority that we have in place to do the work that we do. Based on the legal authority that I have, which is delegated to me from the Department of Pesticide Regulation, these facilities have not done anything incorrect, illegal, or inappropriate. That doesn't mean that we're not having negative effects on the other end, but they are complying with the law. Once we became aware of what is taking place, we have implemented new restrictions, which I mentioned during my presentation, and these restrictions should have effects on the emissions. It should be reduced. Mind you, we've done everything from reducing the amount that they're going to use to implementing new mechanical implementation of those mechanical sources, and changes in the practices of how they do the work. Speaking to the workers are wearing respirators. There's a USDA inspector there the whole time that there's an inspection. The work is taking place. So there's a federal agent right there alongside the inspection. In facilities, well, they're wearing a respirator because they're adjacent to the chemical. It's the law. They have to do that. Yeah. The children from the school are about 1,000 feet away from there, so they're not coming into contact with the pesticide at the same level that these people working with it are. Okay, Okay, we'll get to that question. So that's what the permitting is, and that's where the permit requirements that we have in place, and that's what we can do at our level at the county.
And I just want to add to that. That's a really good question. First of all, I want to be clear in terms of asking the facilities, these new permit conditions that are being introduced are now legally required to follow. So the fact that they have adopted them in means that now if they're in violation of that, we can take an enforcement action. And so it is important to know that it's not just that we're asking and trusting. The other thing that's really important about the data dashboard is that from our modeling and looking at wind patterns, we established that where the current monitor is really the hot spot. It's the highest point we estimate measured in the area. And so we're going to continue to measure there and make that hourly data public, not just in May, say, wait and we'll tell you, but every hour, every day, you can get those up-to-date measurements. That dashboard is refreshed, I think, 8 times a day. And so what in the place where we measure the highest amounts, the concentrations are, as we work to make sure that these changes and track the progress go below that health protective level. So I just want you to know that we're releasing that data dashboard in an effort to be transparent with the community, so you don't have to trust us. It's directly going from that monitor to the website for your information.
Thank you, Kevin and Max. And I just want to acknowledge that Mr. Holden asked a question that it wasn't on the mic, so I'm not sure if it was captured for the folks on Zoom, but the question was in response to what Max Regis said about the workers having respirators while they're using the pesticide. Mr. Holden said, well, what about the children? The children at the school don't have respirators. And Max's response was, well, they're about 1,000. They're not as close to the pesticide, right, as the folks who are working there. I want to make sure I'm saying that correctly. And so I just wanted to make sure that that was captured on the mic so that the interpreters heard it and can make sure that folks on the Zoom heard it as well. Okay, thank you. All right, Jen, I think there's another question over here, and then we'll come back here.
Good evening. Hello, everyone.
Your name?
My name is Sarita Clark. How is everyone doing? I'm very nervous because I struggle with public speaking, but I'm passionate about what I want to say, so I want to get it out. So be very patient with me. So my name is Sarita. I am one of the community health workers here at LABACA, Long Beach Alliance for Children with Asthma. I just want to stress the fact that we are health educators. Our goal is to educate our parents, to inform our parents on what are the triggers, what are the concerns that are associated with their children having respiratory concerns. I know that there's data that shows that cities, including Long Beach, have the highest rates of poor air quality. We have the highest rates out of any other state. So the accumulation of poor air quality with additional pesticides, additional toxins that are being pushed into the environment are just continuing to cause harm to our families, to our children, to ourselves. There was something that was mentioned about the health protection levels and the different types of concerns. There are acute concerns, which are more short term, and then there are long-term concerns. Okay, sorry. I think that the problem that I'm having is that some of the concerns are contradictory, and it's a challenge for us to educate our parents on, how to prevent their children from being sick when there are constant things that they're being exposed to that are contributing to their kids being sick. So I wanted to just say that, we educate our parents on, ventilation, the importance of clean air. But then you're telling us to tell our parents to close their doors, which will then cause our kids to have additional concerns. So how do we support our families? What do we tell them if the information that we're receiving is conflicting to the methods that we are encouraging them to use to support their families?
Thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Paula.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your courage and sharing with us about your public speaking. That was great. I appreciate that so much. And you are right. We hear loud and clear, and we know that this community is impacted by different things, and it must be very overwhelming to even think about how to protect yourself, how to reduce risks. And so when we talk about the health risks associated with the health protective levels, what we talked about, chronic and acute, we're talking about it specifically for methyl bromide. So when we mentioned that there were high readings or high concentrations that were found in February and in May, the recommendation is or one thing that you can do to reduce increased exposure is to close doors and keep your door shut during those times. However, we recognize that there are other things that can impact the community in terms of access to other things that can protect you, indoor air quality, other things. And for that, the assessment in these questions is specifically just for methyl bromide. So I understand the confusion, and maybe that's something that we can take into consideration for building recommendations that are more specific to all the things that the community is experiencing, because I recognize the limitation on these recommendations that we're giving today. That's something that we can work together in terms of interagency collaboration. But yeah, I appreciate your comments, and we hear loud and clear about the cumulative impacts and the conflicting recommendations, and we can do better for that. We can do better for you.
Thank you so much, Paula. And I want to just acknowledge and thank Irene and Sharita, right? I have an aunt named Sharita. I want to thank both of you for being here and on behalf of the families and getting this information and taking it back. I mentioned to you all earlier that I had childhood asthma. I had severe childhood asthma all the way up until I was in college. And I got conflicting information all the time about what needed to happen in order to, for my respiratory illnesses to be addressed. And it wasn't until I literally left South LA, where I grew up, went to San Diego, saw completely different doctors. And it was mind blowing to me that this information was not readily available in the community and that there was misinformation about how to address these things. So thank you for being there for the families. Thank you for being here for the families. Thank you for taking the information back. And I agree with Paula. We all have to we have to do better, right? That we need to do better by the children. I'm going to turn it over to Ian because he wanted to respond as well. And then we have a hand online, and then Mr. Golden, who's been waiting so patiently.
So I think it would be good to talk a little bit about this. One of the things I try to do is present a little bit of context because every family has their own life circumstance, right? And there's a lot of factors they need to consider. What are their indoor allergens? Is it, what is, a lot of things. I can't even go through the whole list. Everybody knows we all have our own personal risks that are going on. And so one of the things we're trying to do is present that context. And so I think one of the things that I tried to show was is what is being breathed from everything we know, from everything we measure, not just methyl bromide, all pollutants that we measure, over 100 pollutants that we measure. What does that impact look like here in this community versus the 17 million other people that are in our jurisdiction? And what we see is that in this case, from non-cancer only, and I should qualify that. We're talking about cancer risk. I'll get to that in a second. From non-cancer and including with methyl bromide, it's about the same as what you would see in almost any other community in our region. If you're talking about cancer risk, which is not what we're talking about here, and that's in particular from diesel particulate matter and the ports and the rail and all that, that's a different story. You know, our port community, you know, there's a real difference there. But from non-cancer, it's about the same. And so when thinking about one's own personal exposure, maybe somebody has a particular sensitivity to pesticides. That needs to be considered. Well, that's different, right? Or they have some other factor that matters to them specifically. If you are concerned because you have some personal exposure that you're worried about, then are these mitigating strategies, right? But looking at in general population, I wanted to provide some of that context. Like this is what the kind of air that we see from a non-cancer perspective across the entire region.
One thing I'll add to that we can do better, and this goes back to something that Ms. Jones mentioned. And it's about this community. Not only are the air pollution or the contaminants, but also the other social determinants of health that impact the community that I hear loud and clear that we need to take into account for building recommendations on how to reduce exposure. So access to cooling centers, access to other things that can mitigate those exposures in terms of accessibility, health access, other things that can impact your health that again are not part of or are a limitation of the current way that we do health risk assessments and the way that we also do recommendations. So I want to be really mindful that this community not only experiences that pollution, but also other determinants of health that definitely should be taken into consideration and are not currently. So I appreciate from both of you for mentioning that.
Thank you. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Paula. Y'all, please give me grace as a facilitator, right? Because we want this to be a dialogue as much as possible. And there are a lot of people who are waiting to answer or to ask questions. And the folks who asked the question that Ian just responded to are saying that they would like to respond to what Ian just responded to. So is it okay if we give them an opportunity to respond because I think they have a follow-up? Is that okay? Is everybody understand what I'm asking? Okay, thank you. I want to work with everybody here, and I don't want anybody to be mad at me because there are a lot of people who have questions, but I think this is important.
Well, I have a question. My name
And
is Maria Garcia, and also I work for the Long Beach Alliance for Children with Asthma. And my question is why the high levels of metoclopramide is from February to May. What happened those months, and what happened in the other months is less high, the levels.
Yeah, so what happens is the commodities that come from another country, in this case, South America, need to be fumigated before they're released into the United States. So during those months, we have what we call the Chilean season. That's when it is summertime in Chile. It's the opposite of here. And they have fruits and vegetables that we don't have here. So those commodities are coming into the country. Those fruits and vegetables are coming into the country. And by law, by federal law, they're required to be fumigated before they're released. Now, a question is, why wasn't this done somewhere else? Why can't it be done somewhere else? There are some factors associated with that. One is that the containers that come in have a particular size and weight, and they cannot legally make it onto the road. So some of these containers have to be broken down and then fumigated at the port, which is where it's coming in. Second issue is that the USDA inspectors are located at the port, and they're the ones that need to do the treatments. So to have these treatments done offsite somewhere else would require USDA to send their inspectors to all of these other different locations. Third, by regulation, we can't have the commodities leave the port without getting fumigated so that we don't spread any of these insects out to the rest of the country. So those are the reasons why.
Thank you. All right, we're going to take a question from Attorney Tony Bell. I think is that the name on Zoom. So we can have you unmute, and then we're going to come back into the room to Mr. Golden.
Great. Thank you, panelists, for being here tonight, and to each of the community members and leaders who came out tonight in order to fight for the families, and also to Jesse Marquez for fighting for this the way that he has. I have a few quick questions that I want to ask, and I'll be real quick in respect of everybody's time. When were the permits issued for these two facilities? And prior to 2018, what steps were taken to regularly monitor, investigate, and enforce compliance of these permitted facilities with the state and federal environmental and public health laws, besides their self-reported monthly usage?
I can speak to the first part. I've been with the county about 27 years, and this has been going on since I joined the county 27 years ago. I can't speak to prior to that. I know we asked one of the facilities, and they said they opened 28 years ago. So that's roughly, we're looking at 27, 28 years that this has been going on. And as far as the permitting, then it is looked at annually. Every year, these permits have to be renewed. They're renewed in December. And the follow-up question to that, I'll pass it over to somebody else in the panel because the time. Well, something. Yeah.
Can you repeat the question? The last one?
Okay, there we go. Yeah, they had to let me unmute. All right. So the second part of that first question was prior to 2018, what steps were taken to regularly monitor, investigate, and enforce compliance of these permitted facilities with the state and federal environmental agencies, the public health laws, besides their self-reported monthly usage that is usually part of the ongoing quote-unquote compliance?
Well, we do annual inspections of different varieties at these facilities, so that was being done. But we don't have air monitoring capabilities at the county. That is done by AQMD, not by the county.
Got it. Okay, thank you so much. And then prior to 2018, was there a written policy or procedure for monitoring methyl bromide emissions from permitted businesses?
I'm not aware of any.
Okay, and then who within the county is responsible for the enforcement and the compliance checks?
That would be us again, Agricultural Commission.
Okay. All right, and then did the county ever receive any concerns before this from environmental agencies or health departments, regulatory bodies regarding unsafe levels of methyl bromide in West Long Beach prior to this, ever?
No. The first time we heard about this was July 24, 2024.
Got it. Okay, real quick. And then are there any records of inspections and compliance with state and federal exposure level reports that are related to methyl bromide since these permits were issued, besides, again, the self-reported usage reports? Any records of inspections and compliance with the levels?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question that I have is, does the county acknowledge any potential liability for failing to monitor the businesses using methyl bromide and the levels therein because of the impact and the potential impact on the community?
That's a bit of a loaded question. I would say that we are acting within compliance. We are acting within the authority that we were given. And yeah.
But I mean, was there any potential, is there any acknowledgement? Like, is this meeting tonight an acknowledgement of that there is a potential liability, and this is, the county's attempts to try to make good on what has happened? Or is the county's position that there is no liability for the county at all in this, and this is just, it is what it is?
I would have to talk to my county council about that, so I cannot answer that at this point.
Okay, thank you. Fair enough. Thank you, everybody.
All right, excellent questions. All right, we're going to turn it over here. Mr. Holden, thank you so much. Golden, I keep saying Holden. Golden, yes, of course. It's a beautiful last name. You are up next.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to Joan. And Joan, mentioned that the studies that you use to get the information from are from working people, people on the job. And when you answered one of the questions a minute ago, you re-emphasized that, but no real answer. And my question is, if we are not getting statistical information about the children, how can you use the other information? And we use a term in California called sensitive receptors. How are sensitive receptors identified and how are they tracked?
I'll take the last question first, then I think some of this might go back to Awiha, and I think Rima answered some of the questions that you had. Just in general, sensitive receptor typically would include something like a school or a residence. So the impact area here would include sensitive receptors as traditionally that term is used. I think the question you asked about what kind of studies or what kind of epidemiological studies are done. Is it just worker exposure or are there other exposures? I thought I'd heard Rima say that there's also a lot of animal studies that are done, and a lot of the Awiha methods take into account the differences between children and adults and those kinds of exposures. But I don't know if Rima is still on and wants to take that, or Paula, if you want to.
Sure, I'm here. Thanks, Ian. I can go ahead and answer some of that question. So we do look at both data in humans and animals. And when we look at data from humans, we look at lots of different types of studies. We look at environmental exposure studies that can occur at a workplace, so occupational exposures. And we can also look at studies with non-occupational exposures. Just keeping in mind that sometimes data from humans is somewhat limited. And so we will also incorporate studies that have exposed experimental animals to, in this case, methyl bromide. And then that gives us an idea of what health effects could occur if a human was exposed. So we can sort of extrapolate that over from the animals to the humans. In the case of methyl bromide, we did use a human study, and that was for our acute REL, so that's that short-term health value. And when we derive our REL, first and foremost, we are very conscious of sensitive subpopulations. So we know that children are much more sensitive to chemical exposures, developing fetuses, pregnant women, sometimes the elderly. So we do build in factors into our values. So we adjust what exposures are seen in a human study for occupational adult people being exposed, and we can adjust that down to a level that should be protective for more sensitive populations, so the children, pregnant women, etc. So that is the way we do that. Whether it's a human study or an animal study, we do incorporate what we would call, you could call them safety factors into deriving our value to be sure that everybody is protected at that reference exposure level.
Or is that information included in the studies that was referenced here? What is RL?
The REL, reference exposure levels, yeah. And we do have, there should be some information on how they're derived on that methyl bromide website that the QR code was shown on one of the slides. So there's information there, and there's also a link back to Awiha's webpage where you can find all of that information. And if you have any questions or you can't find information that you'd like, we have an email address available on our website. You're welcome to send us an email and we can make sure that you get the information that you're looking for.
And by methyl bromide being what the term is promulgated, where the mother can pass it on to the unborn child?
Sorry, one more time. Can you say that one more time?
It's a term where the infection rate or the exposure rate, if the mother has it, it can be passed on to the unborn child?
Yes. So there are studies we look at. Typically, they tend to be in animals because we can do a controlled exposure for pregnant animals. And then we can look at what effects can occur in the developing fetus. So in the case of methyl bromide, there are some developmental effects that can occur with long-term exposure to high levels of methyl bromide. So things like reduced birth weight. And again, those were seen in animal studies. And so to make sure that we're adequately protecting the human population, we build in those safety factors to make sure that the value we have is protective.
And is it safe to say that with those factors built in, that we may be missing something with sensitive receptors?
Yeah, that's a great question. With the safety factors that we use to develop our value, that's a level that we would not expect any health effects to occur, even in sensitive subpopulations. And so, we do our best to try to account for all of that.
One last piece about the smokestack recommendation for the new permitting. Is that a certified alternative? Or how are we going to know, is this a certified alternative to eliminate
Well,
this exposure?
The term certified, there is no certified alternative. What we have is the studies that were done by my panelists to the right through modeling, and also the industry has done some modeling, and both of those models arrived at the same conclusion.
And in some places, aren't there facilities built precisely to do this type of fumigation that are airtight, and they have either carbon filters on them, or they have some other type of recovery system where it does not leave the site?
No, there are not. All facilities in California have the same methods.
Yes, but I'm not saying in California. I'm saying anywhere in this world.
That I do not know.
So there could be alternatives that you are not using or have not located. Because I don't like being a test. I don't like being a test. You're testing our lives. That is unacceptable. Because we have other technologies that are available that we know work. Joan just gave you one. She refused to use it.
I mean, I will comment to the fact that I'm not refusing to use anything. I'm operating within the guidelines of what I have and the recommendations that came from the other
So
departments.
we need the political people to change the guidelines?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna pass, we have a couple hands online, but Miss Lillian over here has been waiting for a while. And so I'm gonna pass it to her, and then we're gonna take questions online and then back to the room. And I'm gonna give Miss Lillian the mic, and then Jim's gonna get.
Hi, my name is Lillian, and I have a couple of questions, but I also have some concerns. I wanted to know, because I just stumbled upon this information on this meeting, and I wanted to know, one, is there anyone here either online or present from our city officials, since it seems like it's higher than what is here that needs to be addressed? I'd like to know if most of us here are residents or businesses that are here, are business owners or workers for the West Side, and what means are we having to communicate to the residents on the West Side? You mentioned that there are over 600 homes that have been detected that may be affected. It's so broad, we don't have a map to say where's the vicinity. So I have an aunt who's 82 that's on oxygen. I have a grandson who goes to the Child Development Center behind Cabrillo High School that's adjacent about 500 feet from Hudson Elementary School. And I have a daughter who's 8 months pregnant that has difficulties with breathing. So it's personal with me. Okay. And they're all here on the West Side. So I'd like to have those questions answered. I'd like to say it's really disheartening to hear that we're going to ask the facilities to operate at 6 o'clock after school time. However, the kids are supposed to be outside playing. And then we're asking them to close their windows and doors, but most of us don't have air conditioners. And we're just going to be locked in our own homes. So to that, I would say that they bear some responsibility, and our local government bears some responsibility to ensure that we don't just do annual checks that we do regularly, surprise checks. That's my questions.
So I think I heard a couple of questions. So we do inspections, and they're not announced. We do announce inspections, but we also do unannounced inspections. That's just part of the protocol. We do that for any kind of fumigation. Anytime you see one of those tarped homes, those are being fumigated, we regularly go out and inspect those and make sure that the tarps are correct, meaning if whatever tarp they're using has to not have any holes in it, otherwise the gas will escape. We make sure that there are sandbags all around the bottom of these tarps so that the gas is not escaping. So there are protocols in place. There are procedures that we follow for that. And as far as elected officials, I can speak to the county. I know that Janice Hahn's office is on this call and they're listening in. They've been made aware of what's going on since we found out.
Regarding the perimeter of exactly where this is at, like we're supposed to go to a QR code. Some people don't have computers or aren't aware of how to get this information. So it has to be on a broader scale of bringing it to the residents' attention. So if it's between Santa Fe and Wilmington and Willow and Wardlow, we need to know the parameters a little bit more than just the Hudson Elementary School area and 600 homes. But now I'm hearing it's coming from the port. So it's like, I just like a little, it's too broad, if you will. Residents deserve, in the city of Long Beach, deserve to know where exactly this is at. So whether they don't live on the west side, but they travel there for either employment or to care for someone or have family members there, they know where this is at. And then these 600 homes, how do we identify those 600 homes? How do we know it's not on the other side of the street? If you don't put the perimeters up there, how do we know to go get tested for it? Thank you.
Yeah, I want to make sure to give the time to DPR who did the modeling. In the presentation, we do have those parameters clearly outlined, but let me turn it over to Mazia Candelus, who can talk a little bit more about the parameters of where we estimate the exposure.
If we can go to the presentation on slide 14, that is a parameter that basically our conservative estimation shows that the blue line that we have on that slide shows the perimeter of the 1 ppb that OOEH mentioned. It is too small, my apology. We had a lot of the slide, but we could put that picture on the slide.
Let me just answer. So
presentation.
Yes. So first, just for everybody in the audience, the parameters in that picture that we see are broadly closest to Webster Street. The northern abounding street is Willow Street. And then the southern one, I believe, and I just want to make sure I have it right in front of me, is West Burnett Street. And so we can make sure to put that on our website. It's on our webpage, the presentation as well. We can make it a little larger. And I hear you. Thank you for that. And we'll try to make sure that's more prominent on the website so that information is easily accessible. I'm sorry, Ricardo, just because there's an online audience, they can't hear you talking. So
for those who are on the Zoom, there's a request in the room by Ricardo that there be signs, physical signs in the physical space in the areas where the boundaries are, right? Did I get that right? Okay. Thank you. So there are lots of hands that have shot up, and I want to make sure that we get everybody. I've been informed that we do have to be out of this space by 9 p.m. because even though we folks here are willing to stay because this is so important, the Salvation Army staff has been very generous in letting us stay here for as long as they can as well. So what I want to do is I want to go to the folks online because we have Alejandra Reyes has had their hand up for a while. And then for everybody who has a question, please raise your hand in the room. And I'm going to try I think it might be easiest if we get everybody who has a question over on this side of the room. And then I'll be able to try to get to these questions as quickly as we can, and be respectful of the workers here too, so they can get home to their families as well. All right? So Alejandra, can we have Alejandra unmuted, please? And as Alejandra's unmuting, because I see they're still muted, I did have someone in the room. What's your name? Jerlene, asked if we could just do a quick poll. How many folks in the room, actually live in West Long Beach? You live on the west side? So residents on the west side. Thank you. If you count Wrigley. And online as well, if you, want to raise your hand or put in the chat. Thank you. Thank you. All right, Alejandra, are you ready?
Yes, thank you. My name's Alejandra. I'm a reporter with Cal Matters, and I'm also a Long Beach resident. I have a couple of questions. I know we're talking about two specific facilities here that use the fumigant, but I wonder if there's anywhere else within the jurisdiction of the agencies present here where this could be happening, where there's exceeded levels of the methyl bromide. And also, how can people know if they live near one of these facilities that's allowed to use the fumigant?
This is Max with LA County Agriculture. So we have looked at all the permits that we have in place. There are currently 9 facilities that are allowed to use this pesticide, and only these 2 are next to residential areas. So the other facilities are not. And we're looking at all these permits to see what conditions need to be changed. So yes, 9.
So 9 in LA County, but I wonder if any of the other folks can say
they're 9
elsewhere in the
yeah, 9, and they're all in the same vicinity, meaning in the port. So they are not outside of that area. Again, as I mentioned earlier, these treatments need to take place at the port.
Are you aware, or I guess this would be a question for CARB. Do they know whether this is an issue near other California ports?
I don't want to speak conclusively if this is or isn't an issue in other places. I can say that we have looked into other areas, and so far we have not identified another instance where there are facilities that don't have adequate controls that are near where people live. A lot of these facilities also exist in places across the Central Valley that are in far more remote areas that are further away from people. But I'm happy to follow up if you have further more specific questions about other locations.
Yeah, and if I may add to that, because it somewhat contradicts what I was saying, the reason that they're doing it in the Central Valley is because when folks buy our produce and our fruits and vegetables, they have requirements that it be fumigated before it leaves the country. So that's a requirement of these countries that are purchasing our produce in order to receive it. Australia, New Zealand, Japan, they have very strict requirements.
Thank you. Is anybody else going to respond from the panel? Okay. I'm going to turn it over here to Miss Connie, right? You're next, and then we had a couple questions over here.
I'll be quick. My name is Connie Loggins. I was actually born and raised on the west side. My family home is still on the west side, and I'm on Webster Avenue, right down the street from Hudson. Okay, so I don't know if you addressed it, but I heard you say in 1989 this was banned. And my definition of banned is banned. It's over. Okay. So I'm just wondering, why is it continuing to be used? Why have certain people been given permission to continue to use this chemical? And then also I heard someone say they will not use this before 6 p.m. I am a humanitarian. I love children. I love all people. Children are not the only ones that are being affected by this. When the children go home, there's still residents there. So this is going to impact them as well. So I would like you to expand your lens and your compassion and take everybody into consideration, and not only the school staff and the students. My other questions have been asked, so I'm going to release the microphone.
Thank you, Ms. Connie. Responses?
Respond to why the pesticide is being allowed to be used.
I believe Max mentioned that it's a federal requirement by USDA for the goods that coming to the US to be fumigated by methyl bromide. So it is a requirement that needs to be done, and as Max mentioned in his answer. So that's one part. The other one, in terms of what you mentioned, that there are residents there. If the slide shows in one of Mac's presentation, there are two maps showing what's currently happening now and what will be the case after the facilities apply all those requirements that Max mentioned. After those, the perimeter of area is very limited and does not expand to the residential area. So just stop before the residential area. If I'm not sure if we can show that slide, it is in the presentation. Can you tell me what the slide number is?
23.
Slide number 23.
We have bad eyesight. Sorry.
I think what I'd like to just say, Connie, thank you so much for your question. I agree. Children are important, but the people that live in those houses are also really important. And 2 weeks ago, we had staff going from door to door handing out flyers about this meeting to make sure that the people that live in those neighborhoods were aware of this meeting. And we also made sure to include information about our website to where they could find out more. And so we also think it's important that people know about it. That's why we want to have this public meeting, to make this information aware. And I think, you can say modeling, who knows what it says. I think the most important thing is what our air monitor is telling. And we're going to be tracking that, making that data available in real time for the public. So what's in the air, in the community, at the place where we've measured the highest values. And so I think the key is we don't want to just leave here saying, trust us. We want you to know that you have access to that data. But we agreed it's important for people in that community to know. And that's why we had this meeting. And that's why we took the extra effort to locally go door to door, make sure people had this information as well. That was some of the people in this room. I do want to just clarify, I'm sorry, the data is updated 8 times a day. So it's not every minute at the same, but you can see the last 7 days every hour, and it's updated on average about 3 hours every day.
Thank you. We've had some folks up here waiting to ask a question, and I see a hand in the back, one over here, and then Cynthia Babbage online. Cynthia, we see your hand, and we'll come back to you too. And your name?
Rosanna. So I have concluded that there are people that get rich at the expense of other people's health. One thing. The second thing was closed windows are not air draft proof. Draft keeps coming into people's houses. And if you can really, really close the window, make your house completely air draft proof, just people that has officiated in their own home from their own carbon monoxide breathing and also carbon monoxide in their homes from heaters, because they make the place so 100% air proof. So people are being asked to incarcerate themselves in their own homes. And then studies that they do on animals and on people, they're limited for a few months or a few years. It's not a lifetime thing, so it doesn't show the result of a whole life cycle. When kids or persons come with symptoms, the doctors are not going to think, oh, this is that bromide thing. And I don't know if there's tests to detect it on the blood. And also agencies are consulted. They come, we're going to put this project, agencies are consulted, but the residents are not the one consulted. And what I have seen when I make bubbles, I can take a wand, make bubbles. All those bubbles they go to different places. They don't all go in a stream together. Some goes up, some go down, left and right. Some go very far, others just pop up right away. And it seems to me like when this study is done, that air that is bad right there, nothing is monitoring when it goes up over another area and then falls at a different place. Also, when babies are born that have been affected before they were born with these chemicals, when they grow older, there's no studies showing how when they have children, those affections in their body pass on to their own children.
Thank you so much. Excellent points. And I'm going to bring the mic on over here because we had a question or comment. No?
Just wanted to follow up on an earlier question and say, I'm Clayton Hurd. I'm with the Office of Assembly Member Josh Lowenthal. So we're here. I know Mr. Joey King from Senator Lena Gonzalez's office was here. I think Natalie from the 7th Council District office was here. I think she just had to leave. And then.
And hi, I'm Jeanette Christian. I'm from Supervisor Hahn's office. I introduced myself as the deputy. So thank you.
We're here. If you want to come yell at us after, we're here. So just.
Thank you. Thank you. So there was yes, question over here. Question over here. I'm sorry. Oh, school board member. Thank you. What's your name? Maria Isabel Lopez. Thank you so much for being here. And you have a question? And then we're going to turn it over to Cynthia Babbitt, who's been waiting patiently, and then these last few questions in the room. Thank you.
My question is, did you take into account when you were looking at school hours that kids have after-school programs, including sports and events, and there's activity taking place, and that when they go home, they also want to go and play? And I guess I just so that's one question. And then I'm going to ask you a question. Would you keep your kids indoors between the months of February to May and close your own windows in your home? I grew up in the West Side. My family lives in the West Side. And all of my nieces and nephews and my parents suffer from asthma. And now we're getting this information. I'm concerned not only for the residents of the West Side, but for all of the students, all of the employees that are breathing this air. And mind you, we don't only have Hudson, we have Cabrillo, we have Muir, we have Webster.
We're sorry. Your conference is
we have
ending
Garfield.
now. Please hang up.
So I want to point out that we are talking about more than one school. And we have multiple daycare programs and daycares in the West Side. But so my question, did we take into account the afternoon programs? And then would you be okay, if someone said, hey, a good solution is to stay indoors and keep your windows shut, your doors shut, and keep your kids inside?
This is Max with LA County. I can speak to the hours. So the treatments are to start after 6 p.m. and their duration is typically 3 to 4 hours. It depends on the volume. It could be longer. So that means that they start venting the pesticide probably around 9 and 10. When we looked at the data that has been supplied to y'all, you can see that those are the times where we're seeing the spikes. So yeah, so we looked at that and we took into account that kids are not going to be hopefully outside at that time, right next to the freeway.
And I just want to add to that as well, a couple points. So first, from the modeling that we did, we estimated that nowhere on school grounds was above or exceeded the health protective level between the 2 years and 23, 24 of the data that we looked at. So we don't think that even in the evening hours, it would have exceeded that level based on the modeling DPR did. And then secondly, to your question, I completely understand. I can tell you we had a lot of back and forth about the conversation about whether to close doors and windows. We are talking about low levels. And so it's not Like if you breathe it in suddenly, you can have an acute reaction. You can have these physical effects. It's just to reduce your risk. We understand there's real trade-offs. And so we really tried to think and ask that question. If we lived in this neighborhood, what advice would we want? And so it's not straightforward. I think the most important thing is that we hope to demonstrate over the next months that we will see that air monitoring levels reduce below that health protective threshold at the place where we've monitored it at the highest. So people know that this isn't something they need to worry about and that these new conditions are working. And so we hope to demonstrate this year that these conditions have been sufficient to reduce the levels to where people don't need to worry. And that is why we're having this conversation, making that data publicly available.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's turn it over to Cynthia on the Zoom, and then we're going to go to the next question we have in the room.
Thanks. I'm Cynthia Babbage. I'm director of the Del Amo Action Committee. We're an environmental justice organization that grew up with Jesse and his organization. We've been watching this issue very closely. What I want to say is it's your job as the regulatory agencies to be protecting us, the public. These facilities are doing something wrong, or we wouldn't be seeing expediences. Shut the damn doors. That's pretty simple, and that's the first step. 27 years knowing that there's these problems going on here around this community. More notification to the school and the public, the lack of transparency with some of the panelists is just very apparent. Where is your empathy gone? Where is your compassion? Just to say that your area is polluted and this is just minimal in addition to what you're already breathing, these are impacts on our body systems. You know, if you're having asthma and respiratory problems, you don't need any additional impacts. Cumulative impacts are real. How are other similar facilities being regulated in other parts of California? I hear that it's happening at all of the ports. Is it just our port that's having a problem, or do you already know that other communities are being impacted? Something needs to be done. Just so somebody can make some money by exporting our products out or bringing products in is not a good enough excuse. So you guys need to buck up. And this is just really, really, really wrong. So I could go on. I have many questions in the Q&A, but I just am really frustrated with the pushing back and forth. I mean, some of you should actually be pushed on the floor by now by the way some of your panelists are looking at you. So stop passing the buck and do something and protect the public or move on to a different job. It's not our job to do your job. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. I don't know if you can hear there are folks applauding in the room, and I think that the feelings of frustration are felt across the board. When Kevin just responded to the last question, I've been in those meetings and I'm here as a facilitator, right? I don't work for any of these agencies. I'm here to help facilitate the conversation with the public. And I am someone who's a member of the public that has dealt with, again, asthma. I have family members who live on the west side, on the actual west side, and are impacted by this. And I think the frustration in the room, with the conversations we've had, the Zoom room we're planning for this has also been there, right? Because it's hard. These are babies. These are people's families. There are our grandparents. There are parents who are being impacted by this. I told y'all I literally tutor children from Webster Elementary School, from Hudson Elementary School, from Cabrillo High School, at the family center at 32nd and Santa Fe, which is not too far away from where we're talking about, right? So this is very, very real and very tangible. And I appreciate you naming the frustration and that we need to do something urgently. Thank you. Sylvia here has been waiting very patiently to ask a question. And then I think Sharita had one more question. And was that it, Mr. Gold? Oh, yeah, that's right. There was a question. I knew there was another question in here. So we have a few questions in the room and we have to get out of here. We got to respect and honor the Salvation Army staff and get out of here. Thank you so much, Sylvia.
Oh my goodness, this is a lesson in knowing I need to get at the front of the queue so that I make sure that I make my comments. Lots of people said what I wanted to say, and so now I have to edit my comments, but I will do my best. And so by the way, my name is Silvia Betancourt. I work with the Long Beach Alliance for Children with Asthma, You heard many of our team members asking questions on this topic. Our scope of work is obviously with children and children with asthma, but we work specifically in West Long Beach, North Long Beach, and Greater Long Beach. Our priority is really around community health. While our scope is children and their lungs, we work with their families, with their parents. We want to be sure not only that our children are healthy, we want to be sure that their parents are healthy so that they're still here for their kids. And our work, really what brings us here today around methyl bromide is with this understanding that children are already vulnerable because of the social determinants of health. And that's just people just use that. They throw it around, but it is very real. We understand that for our families, access to good health care, access to a good paying job, access even just to the information and knowing what they're being exposed to is very limited. And it was not fair to our families in West Long Beach to not know that in 2019, there were high levels of methyl bromide found. And that in 2023 and 2024 as well. And here we are in 2025 now discussing it. My question is, why wasn't the community informed so that people could take steps to protect their health and their safety? Number one. I'm also concerned about some of the changes in the permits. So the permits were now amended, updated after 20 or so odd years of this permit being in place. I'm concerned that they didn't reflect the real community needs. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a physician. We do work on public health, and so we're very aware of the health effects of our environment and our health. But when I think about some of the solutions that have been brought forth, I have to question based on the knowledge that we do have. That being that we know, for example, that the longer you are in a location, the higher the risk to your health. We know that your proximity to a location, the higher the risk to your health. We know that the cumulative effects, right? That there are cumulative sources of pollution, the higher the risk to your health. This idea of putting a stack or some kind of a chimney that would disperse the methyl bromide further and not localize it makes me wonder, well, what is going to happen to other communities? We don't want it in our neighborhoods. We don't want it localized, but what's going to happen to other neighborhoods? That's my other question. The other part is you're proposing to do this during nighttime hours. And one of the things that we've learned about diesel pollution is that with the inversion layer at night, during nighttime, that the inversion layer pushes that diesel pollution closer to the ground. And so likewise, everything else that our community members are exposed to. I don't want to ask, did you consider that? Why wasn't that a calculation? Again, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a meteorologist, but some of these things are kind of basic. And so we're also asking community members to close their doors and their windows. This was brought up multiple times. We're asking community members to respond to a problem that really should be addressed at the source. And so if we're not correcting it at these facilities and any of the other facilities where they operate or are fumigating, again, we're putting that responsibility on our community members. And as one of our community health workers mentioned, and I should say, like, we came prepared thinking about what it is that our community members would ask, because we're in their homes daily. We're on the front lines, and we're at the point when the health impact is already a problem. So we don't want to get to that place now with, if we're dealing with diesel PM and we're dealing with refineries, we're dealing with a lot of other sources of pollution, and now we're adding this layer of methyl bromide. Why would we wait and see? I'm hearing you, Kevin, when you say we hope. If the season is February through May, I don't want to hold on to hope. People need a immediate solution. And one of the other things I noticed is that if the levels progressively went higher from 2023, 2024, we know that there are increasing containers coming through the ports. Do we anticipate that in 2025 they're going to be higher? Do we anticipate people will be buying more grapes? I think that if you can also speak to that, right? Because thinking about how these commodities are continuing to grow, do you anticipate more commodities passing through our communities? Again, passing through, fumigating in our communities. Okay, I'll stop there.
So I can answer one of those questions working backwards.
We literally are right at time, folks. Yeah, we got, so I know. I totally understand. And trust me, if we could stay longer, I would, but this is not our space, right? The Salvation Army staff have been waiting patiently as well. They were supposed to leave an hour ago. And I totally understand. So Kevin.
Let's take the time to answer all of those questions. I think there was 3 different sets of questions. The first one was why wasn't the community notified in 2019 and then 2023 and 2024 from the monitoring data? So maybe Ian from South Coast can answer the first question, and then Adolfo can answer the second part of that question.
Sure. So the study was published in 2021 when the data became available. We did advertise, as much as we can, but it didn't clearly get to this community. Right. So I think we need to do better. We're conducting our next Mate 6 study, and I think this is a lesson learned for thinking about how we advertise results for the next one. But that said, the levels that we found during that study were lower, one property away, but they were lower than what was found in the most recent level. So it wasn't above, for example, the REL of 1. It was below that. So it was lower levels at the time.
I can speak to the usage. The usage has actually decreased. Back in 2018, it was higher. What we have is aggregate data from all the different facilities that did treatments, and the usage has decreased, and it seems to have stabilized. So as new markets open up, correct, like a new type of grape, for example, that's what we call a new market, or that's what the USDA calls a new market. Those commodities would be added on. But we're not seeing a trend of it going up. We're actually seeing a trend of it going down. And that could be, why is that happening? It could be that materials are going to other ports. I'm not sure why that's happening, but that's what's happening. Yes. The question was, do we keep record of how much we purchase? So purchases, yes, we keep records of how much is being used. Now, when we hear commodities and they're going somewhere else, this is food. It's apples, it's grapes, it's blueberries. It's not, car parts. So it's our food source that's coming into the country from other countries.
Thank you, Max. And I want to thank every single person who came out tonight and showed up on the Zoom. I really literally wish that we could stay longer, and I apologize. Sylvia, thank you for your questions as we wrapped up, and I'm sorry that we don't have more time. Trying to strike the balance between making sure that we hear every single voice in the room and then honoring the fact that these are employees who are trying to get home to their families, and they're giving us the space, right? Like letting us use the space. We want to respect that too. There are ways for everybody to continue to ask your questions and get more information. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin from CARB, who's going to share how to do that. And then we'll wrap up for tonight.
So I do want to just thank you all for staying for 3 hours with us for this conversation. I know that we didn't get to answer all of your questions. On the presentations that were emailed to everybody that were handed out in this meeting, there is a link to our website. On that website, there is an email for the County Agricultural Commissioner's Office about specific questions related to the permits. There is an email for air monitoring at CARB that you can reach out to for more information about the air monitoring data. And then there is the another email generic right at the top of the website that you can follow up with for specific questions. So we'll be monitoring those email addresses. And if you'd like to schedule a phone call or have a follow-up conversation, we are available. We're so sorry that we have to leave this space that we've been using, but we do want to make sure to keep in touch with you. So please find us afterwards. And thank you so much for your time. And we'll continue to update the website, and please use the data dashboard to see the air monitoring data in your neighborhood. So thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see how our fans are. We have 3. Thank you.